Chapter 1208 The long-awaited Serenity. Leave legends in 9 places other than this planet. Isn't this the cosmos? Looking at the potion formula in his hand, Klein nearly frowned. He felt that this was more dangerous than the advancement ritual of a miracle invoker. Although the box of the Great Old Ones and the 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Abraham family, as well as a number of Grade 1 sealed artifacts, had the ability to send people into the cosmos, making the ritual appear simple, he clearly remembered that the Church of Evernight's ascetic leader, Ariana, had once warned him that the cosmos contained extremely terrifying corruption. It was dangerous to even understand it before becoming an angel. One will be corrupted by the cosmos if they aren't a planeswalker, and to become a planeswalker, one has to travel the cosmos. This has become an impasse. There's no way to resolve it. Perhaps, the Abraham family has records of relatively safe locations in the cosmos. I can't be too pessimistic. Also, I have to use divination to verify the authenticity of this formula when I'm back. Dorian not lying to me doesn't mean that he wouldn't be lied to. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at Dorian Gray Abraham opposite him. Where are all the Planeswalker Beyonder characteristics? Having memorized the fool's honorific name, Dorian thought for 2 seconds before saying, 2 of them are in the form of Grade 0 sealed artifacts in our family. 1 is in the form of the box of the Great Old Ones. 1 is said to be in the hands of the Demoness sect, while another is with the Church of the God of Combat. There is 1 more, but no one has found it since the Second Epoch. If I could use the box of the Great Old Ones to exchange for one of the 2 relatively normal Grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Abraham family, I wouldn't have to worry about obtaining the Planeswalker Beyonder characteristic. However, that advancement ritual is truly a problem. Besides, the essence of this ritual is clearly to leave a mark in the cosmos. No matter how many changes are made, I won't be able to bypass the cosmos. Klein controlled his expression and nodded at Dorian. I hope you can find the answer when the crimson moon becomes full. With that said, his figure rapidly turned faint, having reached Furz's limit. Upon seeing Gehrman Sparrow leave like that, Dorian subconsciously looked down at the piece of paper with the honorific name of the fool in his hand. He realized that it had also turned illusory and disappeared. Dorian was unable to find the correct answer from the various Beyonder powers recorded by his family. He turned to look at Furz, opened his mouth, intending to ask her. At that moment, he felt a sudden pain in his heart as his pupils rapidly dilated. Oh no! The curse is about to act up. Dorian hurriedly reached into his pocket to retrieve a small metal bottle. He opened the lid and gulped it down. Clang! His actions were so hurried that the lid of the metal bottle fell to the ground. Furz watched as her teacher's face turned pale. She watched as he clutched his chest, unable to react to what had happened. As a former surgeon, she quickly came to a conclusion and hurriedly said, "Teacher, are you having a heart attack? Do you have any special medicine?" After asking the last question, Furz realized that she had been overly anxious and concerned, making her appear a little silly. The bottle that the teacher drank was definitely the special medicine. Do you need any help? I have the recorded, a doctor's powers, Furz asked when she saw that her teacher had recovered based on his expression. Dorian shook his head, indicating that he was fine. At the same time, he sighed inwardly. It's because you didn't do as I planned and had directly summoned Gehrman Sparrow into this room, causing me to not have time to drink the medicine. Sonia C., the capital of the Rorstad Archipelago, the city of generosity, Biome. The Blue Avenger docked at the port in the evening. During that period of time, the damage brought to the sea traffic around Sonia Island by the Church of the Lord of Storms had finally attracted the actions of the Fasak Empire's demigods. Many captains had died in the line of duty, and their fleet had suffered a severe blow. Alger Wilson and his crew avoided this attack while hiding in the primitive forest of the island while waiting for an opportunity to attack the port. After the Church of the Lord of Storms and the lone naval army declared their goal for this battle had been achieved, they returned to Pasu Island to rest since it was over. After that, Alger deliberately engaged in battle. He appeared pious, passionate, and fervent. He was praised by the cardinals as a result. This was because he was familiar with the area around the Rörsted archipelago. Without a doubt, he had been sent here to strengthen the naval forces of the important colony. Of course, in order to avoid conflict with his past identity, he also made preparations for other matters in the future. Alger and his crew arrived in Biam in the name of recruiting pirates. In this war, many pirates were recruited, effectively making up for the losses of the navies of the various countries, just like the recruitment of mercenaries during the early and mid-stages of the Fourth Epoch. Taking advantage of the fact that there was still some light in the sky, Alger got off the boat and headed straight for Sea King John Cotman's Cathedral of Waves. As a Sequence 5 ocean songster, he had the right to directly meet the Church of the Lord of Storms Cardinal, a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers. As he walked, Alger suddenly saw a familiar face. It was a middle-aged man wearing a formal suit, a bow tie, and glasses. He looked rather refined, but Alger knew very well that he was a believer of sea god Calvetua. He had once been a pirate, and now he was a merchant that did business with both the authorities and the underworld. "Long time no see, Ralph." Alger greeted the illegitimate child that had Loan, Faceac, and Rörsted mixed blood. Ralph was stunned for a moment, as if he couldn't recognize the captain of the Blue Avenger. "Alger? Our captain of the ghost ship?" After a few seconds, he asked in surprise. Alger smiled and said, "Did I change a lot?" Ralph frowned and replied, "Your temperament has changed a lot. It's even more like the ocean and dark clouds before a storm. Quite a keen eye. However, this is an act I'm deliberately showing. After consuming the ocean songster potion, if there wasn't such a change, I wouldn't seem like someone from the Church of the Lord of Storms." Alger sighed and said, "Because there are too many things to worry about. Now, it's all good, I've already been hired by the Church of the Lord of Storms." Ralph narrowed his eyes as a sense of vigilance rose in his heart. He laughed and said, "This is indeed a good thing, if there was no war." Alger glanced at the spot where Ralph had just come out and asked, "When did a new school appear here?" He could see at a glance that there were 4-story buildings, a cement field, a garden lawn, and many children happily playing. The children had dark skin, but some of them didn't have bronze skin like the locals. Their hair was only slightly curled, and it wasn't too obvious. Without a doubt, this group consisted of mixed-blood children. Ralph looked back and sighed with a smile. "Didn't you donate money to my charity foundation?" "Under God's guidance, I established a few schools in several large cities on the island, specially providing education, 3 meals, and accommodation for these discriminated children. Our childhood was gloomy, and I don't want them to be the same." At the same time Ralph responded, Alger kept staring at the school. When Ralph was done speaking, Alger looked away and said, "I thought you would have taken at least half of it." Ralph broke out into laughter. "Seems like I left a terrible impression on you. How is it? What opinions do you have about this school?" Alger sized him up and said, "Do you think I've been to school before?" He paused for a moment before saying, "Which street is your charity foundation on? I might come to you for something in the future." Thinking that the other party had been hired by the Church of the Lord of Storms, Ralph didn't dare to expose his connection to the resistance. He chuckled and said, "It's fine to donate, but you don't have to come for anything else." After giving the location of the charity foundation, Ralph returned home. He went up to the 2nd floor and knocked on the door of a room. "Lord Danitz, I have something to report." In the room, a deep and dignified voice replied, "Come in." Backlund, Sherwood Borough. Dorian, who lived in a rented apartment, walked to the window. As the sun set, the sky gradually darkened. The crimson moon would be full tonight, and the curse of the Abraham family would descend once again. It had been a while since he had shaved his beard. Around his mouth, on both sides of his cheeks and lower jaw, there was a white mustache growing. It appeared out of place with his middle-aged man's appearance. After looking for a while, Dorian bowed his head and recited in Jotun, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." After ending his prayer, he returned to his room and found a sofa to sit down. He waited for the crimson moon to rise and for the period when the spirituality was the strongest to arrive. At that moment, in the ancient palace above the grey fog, Klein had already taken his seat that belonged to the fool. He beckoned for a paper figurine. The paper figurine was surrounded by the power of Sapphira Castle as it passed through Dorian's prayer light and landed on him. During this process, Klein deliberately didn't show any effects, allowing the angel to silently embrace Dorian. He felt that if Mr. Fool were to appear too bombastic, it would scare this ancient family's member, so he chose to keep a low profile. The waiting process was always torturous. From time to time, Dorian would take out his pocket watch, click it open, and take a look. He wanted to know how long more before the full moon possessed its highest spirituality. This was something that could be inferred through the mysticism knowledge. Finally, when it was almost dawn, Dorian instinctively bent down to reduce the pain brought by the curse. However, as time passed, all he heard was complete silence. There were no buzzing ravings. The crimson moonlight passed through the window and shone on Dorian. He looked up in a daze and felt that the surroundings were serene, calm, and indifferent. Nothing abnormal happened. Dorian looked out of the window and saw the crimson moon. It was pure, dignified, gentle, and dreamy, as though it was hanging on his heart. After a moment of silence, Dorian lowered his head and took out his pocket watch. He raised his right hand and rubbed his eyes. He covered his face and didn't loosen his grip for a long time. The white mustache on his face gradually became messy, stained with tears and snot. Chapter 1209. Two choices inside the room. The crimson glow was like water that soaked every corner. Dorian slowly lifted his head and looked at the full moon outside the oriel window. He didn't look away for a long time, as if he was admiring a beautiful scenery for the first time. Phew! He let out a breath, stood up, and entered the bathroom. He turned on the tap, held up a mouthful of biting cold water, and splashed it hard on his face. After washing up, Dorian wiped his face with a towel and returned to the living room to sit on the sofa. He lowered his head and muttered piously, "Praise be to Mr. Fool." After completing his prayer, he walked into the study, took out a pen and paper, and wrote to Furs. "Please tell Mr. Gehrman Sparrow that I have confirmed his promise. I hope he can find a better way to resolve the curse. I will gather the other members of my family to discuss if I should use one of the 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts in exchange for the box of the Great Old Ones. Here, let me introduce the 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts so that Mr. Gehrman Sparrow will have sufficient time to consider which one he wants. One of them is called Scroll of God. It looks like an ordinary oil painting in a brass frame, but the content on it will change at random. When it shows different locations, the wielder can change the surroundings of the target, allowing the corresponding scene to descend. When it shows different figures, the wielder can allow those people to attack their targets with 1 target per figure. When it presents an abstract image that cannot be understood, different real effects will happen, and the only thing we know about the corresponding relationship is a very small portion. When it depicts doors, opening different doors will move one to different places. There's no way to predict where the destination will be. It can be used to exile its target. When it shows the dark underground or deep cosmos, it will be extremely dangerous. It has to be sealed. If no one looks at it or takes in the marvel of the oil painting, then the person inside will come to life. They will reach out their hands from the oil painting, and slowly enter the real world. One must pay attention to this when sealing it. Once upon a time, when one of my family's branches were in charge of the Scroll of God, there was a mistake. No one appreciated it for a full minute. And at that moment, it presented an image of an angel revolving around a deity. Then, the deity came alive and walked out of the oil painting. That branch of my family was destroyed just like that. There were only a few members remaining who had lost their minds, while that deity had gone somewhere unknown, but the painting was left behind. We had been worried for quite some time, afraid that the deity would destroy the world. Fortunately, he never appeared again. Perhaps he had already been noticed by the 7 deities and was dealt with. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that this is a story made up by those who have lost their minds. However, for most of the members to have died overnight, with a small number going mad, that in itself implies enough. The other Grade 0 sealed artifact is called Staff of the Stars. Its appearance is a black cane with embedded gems. While holding onto it, using corresponding scenes in your mind, one that truly exists and is still in existence, the staff will transport you directly to the destination, but you must be careful. The scene depicted must be absolutely correct. Every detail must be accurate. There cannot be any differences with the original. Otherwise, you will never know where your destination is. Similarly, while holding on to the Staff of the Stars, if some beyonder powers or figures appear in your mind, this cane will reenact the corresponding powers and person. The latter will be a single attack. To achieve such an effect, one has to have sufficient understanding of the powers and figures. Otherwise, you have no idea what kind of anomaly will happen. Once, someone used the Staff of the Stars to release Lightning Storm, but he ended up turning himself into a frog. Recovery was only possible once the method to remove the curse was found. The Staff of the Stars is sufficiently hard and can be used to attack. A person struck by it will randomly mutate or suffer strange effects. Previously, I used the Staff of the Stars to hit a beyonder from the Aurora Order. The left side of his body was moved outside a door, and his right side remained where it was. His organs splattered out as a result. The Staff of the Stars will randomly move about. If it isn't properly sealed, it might disappear at some point in time and escape your control. When holding it, one's head has to be empty most of the time. This is because once an image appears, it can trigger the effects I described in the beginning. If there's no one holding onto it, all sorts of abnormalities will happen around the Staff of the Stars. It's hard to predict what will happen. It has to be sealed. Burn upon reading. After writing the letter, Dorian read it several times to make sure that there was no mistake before stuffing it into an envelope and pasting a stamp on it. At that moment, in the ancient palace above the grey fog. Through the prayer point of light, Klein had watched Dorian's entire process of writing the letter. I seem to have forgotten to tell him that he can pass the corresponding information to Gehrman Sparrow through Mr. Fool. That's good too. I'll just treat this as a benefit of being a formal member of the Tarot Club. If every believer were to do this, I wouldn't be able to cope if I didn't leave any worms of spirit in Sapphira Castle. Yes, this can also effectively maintain Mr. Fool's prestige. It will ensure that the Abrahams won't dare to belittle Mr. Fool. Klein mumbled before turning his attention onto the 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts. He once again confirmed that Grade 0 sealed artifacts had severe negative effects and couldn't be used as common items. Of course, their powers had extremely terrifying and potent effects. They were worthy of the Grade 0. In comparison, the Staff of the Stars is more suitable for me. I can get Miss Justice to hypnotize me in advance so that my subconscious thoughts won't appear in the form of an image or scene. Only by consciously willing it in my mind will I be able to form the outline of a scene. I wonder if the residents of the City of Silver will be able to leave the forsaken land of the gods with the Staff of the Stars in their hands by just outlining the scene of Backlund streets in their minds. But there's no way to hypnotize them before this. They haven't really seen Backlund. Even if they restore the corresponding scene, it's difficult for them to accurately outline the details. Anyway, it's very troublesome, but I can give it a try and choose a volunteer who isn't afraid of death. If I can exchange for the Staff of the Stars, there's no need to rush to shatter it and turn it back into a characteristic. Who knows when it might come in handy? After all, the advancement ritual might not be completed. With the Staff of the Stars, I can deal with the dark demonic wolf and escape the forsaken land of the gods right under the dark angel's nose. This will give me a little more confidence. Klein sighed as he made his decision. At this moment, he discovered another truth. That was if some of the members of the Abraham family followed Dorian and switched faiths to Mr. Fool, then even if he returned the box of the Great Old Ones to them, it wouldn't be difficult to borrow it in the future. In other words, out of the 3 Grade 0 sealed artifacts, the Staff of the Stars, the Scroll of God, and the Box of the Great Old Ones, he would gain the right to use 2 of them and have ownership over 1. It's still very useful to develop believers. When the time comes, wouldn't the Abraham family become a subordinate faction of the Tarot Club? However, Dorian definitely won't spread the faith of the Fool so quickly unless some members are already on the brink of losing control, without the ability to resist the curse of the next full moon. For some reason, he felt that the power of the Tarot Club was expanding. He thought about it seriously and felt sad that he would have to respond to his believers 24 hours a day in the future. Only by becoming an angel and truly gaining ownership of Sapphira Castle did he dare leave a few worms of spirit behind so as to resolve this problem. If that really doesn't work, I'll get a Rhodes to be my artificial intelligence customer service. Klein rubbed his temples and left the grey fog before returning to the forsaken land of the gods. Late at night, in the waters of the Rorstad archipelago, a huge sea monster quickly swam to its destination. This was the helper that Alger had requested from sea god Calvetua. At the level of an ocean songster, he was still unable to control a creature of such size. In truth, he could totally swim from Biome, but that would be too tiring, and he wouldn't be able to resist any accidents. A few seconds later, the sea monster opened its mouth. Alger swam out and approached a beautiful coral thicket. After circling a few obstacles, a dark blue glow suddenly appeared in Alger's eyes. Through this dark blueness, he saw a beautiful coral palace. It was so real, but no one could see it unless there was a specific medium. Alger stared at it for a while before swimming forward. He came to the front of the palace and pushed open the door. The churning water came to a halt as Alger passed through the barrier and landed on the ground thanks to the wind. He looked around and saw that there were murals on both sides. The contents of these murals weren't surprising. The people with elven faces mainly focused on resisting the storm. However, Alger noticed that the ships weren't out at sea, but in the midst of a thick, nearly indestructible, blackness. This made Alger think of a phrase, abyss. This is somewhat similar to the abyss as spoken in legends, but it's just a little similar, and there aren't any devils either. They seem to be coming from underground. These murals record the history of the elves. But they don't match the corresponding myths. The world said that each elvish word corresponds to a first-generation elf. As Alger pondered, he walked towards the 9 steps ahead. As he drew closer, he saw 2 thrones and a dark blue crystalline coral. On the coral branches, silver bolts of lightning flashed, illuminating the surroundings. Alger held his breath as he slowed down his pace and went up the stairs to the throne. He extended his right hand solemnly and picked up the coral. With a splashing sound, the seawater outside the palace suddenly churned. As for the coral, under the cover of a dark blueness, it gradually turned illusory and merged into Alger's body. Lightning bolts bloomed one after another like flower petals. Chapter 12 10 Moon City in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, at night when the frequency of lightning was very low. A few humanoid creatures cautiously approached a meatball with 6 legs and more than 10 eyes. They were wrapped in animal skins or clothes with materials that couldn't be identified. With the help of a few lanterns, they passed through the endless darkness with heavy expressions. On their faces, there were about 10 to 20 tumors. Some of their eyes were nearly squeezed together, while others didn't have a nose, with only a black hole in that place. After a series of intense battles, they managed to successfully finish off the monster and split into two groups. One group guarded the surroundings, and another group reaped the spoils of war. During this process, the man with many meat tumors on his face dissected the monster's corpse. When he was searching for edible parts, he suddenly stopped. "Adal, what's the matter?" the woman without a nose asked curiously. The man named Adal slowly retracted his right hand and revealed an item he had found from the monster. It was a stone-carved amulet covered with marks of corrosion. "This is," the man, whose eyes were nearly squeezed together, seemed to understand the reason and hesitated to finish his sentence. Adal surveyed the area and said, "Xiaofan, Rus, this was given to my father when I was young. On the day I became an adult, he felt that he could no longer control himself. He chose to leave the city and enter the depths of the darkness." When Xiaofan and Rus heard that, they fell silent for a moment. They could understand Adal's feelings. This was a common occurrence in Moon City. As there was no safe edible food, they could only pick the mutated plant fruits and collect the flesh of monsters to maintain their survival. This resulted in the accumulation of toxins and madness in the body. After a decline in their physical conditions, they would either die quickly or gradually lose control. In order to not cause any damage to the surroundings and city, those who were part of the latter would often arrange everything after sensing that their conditions weren't right. With a torch and a small amount of food, they would leave the defensive perimeter and wander into the eternal darkness alone, never to return. The residents of Moon City could imagine what would happen to them. They would either be killed by monsters or become monsters. There was no other possibility. After 7 to 8 seconds of silence, the woman without a nose hesitantly said, "Perhaps, this is the monster that killed your father. It has a belt made of animal skin wrapped around it." Adal's voice gradually lowered. He picked up the dagger made of bone and forcefully inserted it, cutting out a relatively normal piece of flesh. Amidst the silence, the members of the hunting team completed their harvest skillfully until Rus, whose eyes were nearly squeezed together, suddenly said in a deep voice, "There are more and more deformities amongst the newborn." The price of accumulating toxins and madness for generations wasn't as simple as reducing their average life expectancy. The people who still had normal physical conditions were gradually experiencing some mutations, just like Adal, who had many tumors on his face. Similarly, the toxins and madness could also be passed down to their descendants, causing mutations to appear. Rus and Xiaofan from the hunting team were examples. Their lives would be even shorter, making it easier for them to lose control and mutate. The more abnormalities there were, the more obvious the implications were. The hunting teams present knew very well that it might not take more than 2 to 3 generations before the residents of Moon City would lose control before they fully grew up or have children. When that happened, even if there was no external attack, Moon City would quickly be destroyed, leaving behind only stone buildings and murals to prove their existence. "I hope the High Priest and the others can find a new direction." Adal stood up with a lantern in hand as he answered weakly. In the past 2 to 3,000 years, it wasn't as if Moon City hadn't found a way to escape their current predicament. They had sent out teams of exploration teams that headed deep into the darkness. Some returned after suffering serious setbacks, with nothing to show for their efforts. Some disappeared into the boundless darkness, and nothing was heard from them ever again. In addition, at a distance away, to the east of Moon City, was a grayish-white fog that blotted out the sky and land. They were like invisible barriers that not only blocked one's vision, but also prevented any living beings from passing through. The residents of Moon City once believed that this was a place of hope. They believed that the area covered by the grayish-white fog was a normal country. They believed that the other side of the gray fog was a land that wasn't cursed. They attempted to enter the grayish-white fog again and again, but all their attempts failed. They had dug a long passageway, hoping to pass through the invisible barrier by going underground. However, the region deep underground was also covered in grayish-white fog. They tried ways to obtain the ability of flight before attempting to cross the barrier at high altitudes, but they didn't manage to see the top of the grayish-white fog before they were struck by lightning. They mobilized the powers of all the demigods and sealed artifacts, attacking the target again and again. Over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years, the cumulative attacks they performed failed to disperse the invisible barrier at all. Upon hearing Captain Audal's words, the members of the hunting team felt hopeless and sad. It was as though they were sliding down the edge of the abyss, but were unable to save themselves. The deformed ones were people who found it difficult to control their emotions. At that moment, they more or less felt like they were suppressing something in their hearts, eager to unleash it. In Moon City, a deformed person wasn't allowed to become a Beyonder or join the hunting teams 200 to 300 years ago. They could only do harvesting work. However, as their manpower dwindled, the high priest and the rest of the higher-ups relaxed the restrictions. Let's go. This bit of food isn't enough. Audal looked around, carrying lanterns as he walked deeper into the darkness. They didn't take the risk of extinguishing the fire, causing monsters to surge out in the darkness, as they might not be able to deal with them. In such a quiet and suffocating environment, the members of the Moon City's hunting team couldn't help but have the feeling that they were enveloped in an endless darkness. It was as though it was impossible to find hope regarding the present situation of Moon City, and the amount of time the lanterns in their hands could burn was decreasing. When the last trace of light dissipated, they would be silently devoured by the darkness. As they walked, a faint yellow light suddenly appeared in Audal's eyes. It was a glow that didn't belong to the hunting team. This bit of light immediately shone into the eyes of all the members of the hunting team, filling their pupils. Audal, Xiaofan, Russ, and company couldn't help but widen their eyes as they felt a deep sense of shock. During their lifetime, there had never been any fires that came from external sources in the history of Moon City after the cataclysm. Indeed, many monsters possessed the powers of fire or the sun domain, but before attacking, they were all hidden in the darkness without revealing any hint of light. And now, a fiery glow appeared deep in the darkness. Audal, Xiaofan, and Russ trembled slightly as they thought for a long time but couldn't think of an answer. They quickly recalled the hunting arrangements and confirmed that it was impossible for residents of Moon City to be nearby. Since the fiery glow didn't belong to Moon City, where did it come from? The entire hunting team slowed down. They were shocked, surprised, curious, fearful, worried, and terrified. They had also discovered some destroyed cities and knew that any abnormalities in the darkness could be fatal. Be alert. Audal finally snapped out of his daze and gave the order. The hunting team immediately took up a battle formation, waiting for the faint yellow light to approach. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Every second was slow. Finally, after the fiery glow grew bigger, a figure appeared. A figure. There's only one person. The members of the Moon City hunting team held their breaths. It seemed like, maybe, perhaps, they might have a chance of seeing an outsider. 2,000 to 3,000 years had passed, and finally, someone else had stepped foot on this land. They were not the only ones left in this abandoned world. As for who could travel through endless darkness and reach this place, Audal and company lacked experience, so they had no way of guessing. As the fiery glow became bigger and more obvious, the hunting team members gradually saw the figure. It was a slim young man. He had black hair and brown eyes, and his expression was cold. He was neither a deformed person nor had he any abnormal changes. He wore a strange hat and strange clothes. He held a lantern made of special materials as he walked over from the darkness. The light of his lantern was even brighter than the combined light of the hunting team. It made the surrounding darkness fade rapidly. It didn't take long before the light shone on the bodies of the likes of Audal, Xiaofan, and Russ. The figure stopped and looked at the Moon City hunting team. He asked in a low voice, "Where are you from?" He spoke Jotun. His eyes are clear, and he can communicate. Audal opened his mouth, stopping his subconscious urge to reply. He asked in return, "Who are you?" The figure with the glass lantern replied calmly, "Gehrman Sparrow." After half a year of traveling and overcoming one difficult obstacle after another, Klein's spiritual intuition finally told him that he was finally reaching his destination. And he had also encountered the first batch of living people in his trip across the forsaken land of the gods. "Where did you come from?" Adal kept his guard up and pressed. Klein swept his gaze across their faces and said without a change in tone, "I came from the City of Silver. And also from a land beyond the cursed lands." Upon hearing this answer, all the members of the hunting team were in a daze. They suspected whether they were expecting too much, causing them to hallucinate. In the autumn of 1351, Backlund, in the midst of the war. Ever since Fanepotter declared war on Lone, the war that had been going on for some time had finally lost its balance. Lone and its allies, Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger, had lost a large amount of territory, leaving only the last few lines of defense that they defended with great difficulty. They were on the brink of being overrun. When she saw the long line of people at the food distribution center through the carriage window, Audrey slowly retracted her gaze and said to her personal maidservant, Annie, "Turn toward St. Samuel Cathedral." Chapter 12:11 Unimaginable/B As the carriage drove slowly along the road, Audrey's gaze subconsciously looked out the window. Many passers-by stood by the roadside, staring at the horse that was pulling the carriage. Their eyes seemed to be emitting a greedy glint as they, the lucky ones, successfully collected their food. They ran through the streets surreptitiously and headed for home. A team of policemen in black and white checkered uniforms were patrolling the streets. They had revolvers by their waists and batons in their hands, means to deter anyone from wanting to take risks. "Recently, we don't even dare to go on the streets alone," the personal maidservant, Annie, whispered to her. Audrey nodded slightly but didn't respond. After a while, the carriage arrived at Phelps Street and stopped at the square in front of St. Samuel Cathedral. The flock of pigeons that were usually here was nowhere to be seen. The Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, as well as the subsequent establishment of the Lone Poverty Relief Foundation and the Lone Medical Charity Foundation, had all moved from 22 Phelps Street to a few small rooms in the cathedral. This was because the buildings that they were originally housed in had collapsed due to the previous airstrike. To the staff of these three foundations, it was a harrowing memory. If they hadn't left 22 Phelps Street in advance due to different reasons, they would have long been killed. After alighting from the carriage and walking through the main door, Audrey saw a black-haired, brown-eyed girl with a rather thin face approach. Before the other party could speak, she said, "Melissa, is there any more food that can be distributed?" Melissa shook her head solemnly. "Even those injured soldiers who we provided relief for can't receive enough food." Audrey's green eyes dimmed. She didn't show her helplessness or weakness as she nodded slightly. "I will think of a way. From the City of Silver. From a land beyond the cursed lands." Gehrman Sparrow's words echoed in the ears of the Moon City hunting team members, Adal, Xin, and Russ. It made them feel like they were in a dream, unable to regain their senses for a long time. Just as Adal gradually regained his senses and was thinking about what to say when Xin, who was born without a nose, inundated Klein with a series of questions. "Where is the City of Silver? What does it look like? How far is it from here? How many normal people are there outside the cursed area?" Klein glanced at her and replied in an emotionless voice, "The City of Silver is located on the other side of the cursed lands. They discovered a type of plant that can be eaten normally called black-faced grass. This has allowed them to maintain their kind's stability and effectively explore the depths of the darkness in a bid to find a way to leave. They recently found some mushrooms. These mushrooms can use monsters as nutrients, forming all kinds of fruits that do not contain toxins and madness. The City of Silver has gone one step further in escaping the madness. Once the newborns become adults, they wouldn't easily lose control even at old age, These words made Adal, Xiaofan and company feel lost, as though their own persistent efforts had no meaning. The city of silver described by Gehrman Sparrow was the most beautiful scene they could imagine, yet, it was something so easily possessed by others. Are there any deformed newborns? Xiaofan asked in a dreamy tone. Klein shook his head. Almost none. Will their parents walk into the depths of the darkness by themselves when their physical condition deteriorates? No, when they become old? Adal subconsciously pressed. Wearing a black trench coat, a top hat, and holding a lantern, Klein replied, no, because they are burdened with the curse of killing their own kin. If a life cannot be ended by the hands of a blood relative, they will turn into a terrifying evil spirit or monster. The members of the hunting team in Moon City finally found a sense of reality. Their hearts felt like they were slowly rising in warm water as bubbles slowly emerged. These bubbles were weak, empty, and easily pricked. There was nothing inside, but they shimmered with something called hope and light. Russ, whose eyes were nearly squeezed together, couldn't help but repeat the question, how many normal people are there outside the cursed area? Klein looked at them with a complicated expression. They are basically normal. They do not need to be constantly worried about monsters attacking them. They don't have to be afraid of being in the darkness. They don't go crazy after growing old. They aren't burdened by all kinds of curses. They see sunlight every day when they wake up, with sufficiently normal food. Every night, the crimson moon rises, however, all of this is being destroyed now. Klein silently added in his heart. This time, Adal, Xiaofan, and Russ were somewhat at a loss. This was because they found Gehrman Sparrow's description as something imaginable, but also seemingly unimaginable. It was just like when they were reading the few ancient books remaining. They could get the spirit of the matter but found it hard to truly understand certain contexts. They had no idea what the sun and what the crimson moon were. However, to have normal food every day without the burden of various curses, the worry of monster attacks or darkness, and the lack of going crazy in old age was a beautiful dream they yearned for day and night. There's such a place in this world? Is this what heaven, as recorded in the ancient books, is? Was this land really cursed? The members of the Moon City hunting team fell silent once again. One of them opened their mouth but was at a loss as to what to ask. Someone wanted to bring Gehrman Sparrow back to Moon City and inform the High Priest of the news, wanting to inform everyone, but he was afraid of attracting danger. During this process, they didn't let down their guard or vigilance. Klein wasn't the least bit surprised with their attitude. Instead, he felt that this was the reaction a civilization that could last to this day in the forsaken land of the gods ought to have. With the lantern in hand, he took a step to the left, attempting to walk around the humans who were dressed in strange materials or animal skins, and he continued heading east. Regardless of what story these people had, whether it was worth helping them in passing, he planned to wait until he began his investigations before listening and considering things. This was because his spiritual intuition told him that his destination wasn't far, and that the legendary West Continent was just 2 to 3 hours away on foot. The moment he took a step forward, Adal and company immediately bent their backs, bracing themselves to defend and attack. However, they didn't manage to see Gehrman Sparrow approach them. They watched as he walked more than 10 meters to the left and continue heading forward. Seeing this young man dressed in strange black clothes and a strange black hat, with a strange and transparent lantern gradually distancing himself from them, the dim yellow light grew weaker and weaker. Adal's face, which was covered in tumors, changed. He shouted loudly, "Who exactly are you?" Klein didn't turn around. Instead, he held the lantern that emitted a faint yellow light and walked deeper into the darkness. He said in a regular tone, "A missionary. A person to spread my Lord's brilliance." Adal, Xiaofan, and company looked at each other, their expressions filled with confusion. They hesitated for a long while, but when there was only a small trace of the dim yellow light left, they instinctively took a step forward and followed behind Klein. They didn't dare to approach him, nor did they want to have him leave their sight. They carried the food they had procured, as though they were monitoring and chasing him in a defensive manner. As for Klein, he walked at an adequate speed, not waiting for them or attempting to shake them off. Just like that, both sides walked in silence under the sparse lightning. At some point in time, Russ and another hunting team had left the main group. They held the animal hide lantern and the food they had obtained and turned around, silently disappearing into the endless darkness. Seconds changed to minutes before Klein finally stopped. Using the lightning that streaked across the sky, he saw a grayish-white fog a few hundred meters away. The mist was connected to the land and extended all the way into the sky, as though it didn't have an apex. At the same time, the fog extended to the two sides without any end. Klein looked at it intently for a long time. Even though there were partitions of darkness, he slowly raised his head. After the second bolt of lightning calmed down, he looked away. Behind the fog or inside it is the disappeared western continent? As he thought with a heavy heart, he couldn't help but slow down his breathing. He carried the lantern and continued forward until the dim yellow light emitted a solidified mist. There was no need for him to make any other attempts. From his intuition as a seer, he could tell that the grayish-white fog was an invisible barrier that couldn't be passed through by conventional means. He thought for a moment and stretched out his right hand to scratch at the darkness in front of him again and again. After doing it 4 to 5 consecutive times, Klein pulled out a black cane with many gems embedded in it. This was the Staff of the Stars, a terrifying sealed artifact known as 0 to 62 that had been swapped using the box of the Great Old Ones. Of course, all he did was summon the historical projection of the Staff of the Stars. This way, even if there were unnecessary scenes that appeared in his mind, he could use the removal of the historical void projection to stop any corresponding dangers that appeared in a timely manner. To a scholar of yore, this was the best way to regularly use a Grade 0 sealed artifact. However, this limited the effects and was something that couldn't exceed 3 minutes at the moment. Furthermore, there was a certain difference with the original version when it came to their effects. Using a marionette to hold the Staff of the Stars wasn't the best way to avoid any negative effects. This was because a marionette needed to be controlled, and any control had a high chance of transmitting scenes. Of course, if he engaged in a battle he was prepared for, Klein wouldn't have done so. This was because it would occupy one of his 3 precious summoning spots. Furthermore, although the Staff of the Stars belonged to him, it was only in a state of forced ownership, and it remained in a sealed state. Furthermore, the Grade 0 sealed artifact had a rather high level. It was impossible for Klein to successfully summon it at once, so it usually took him 3 to 6 attempts. In a fierce battle, it would require plenty of chances, nothing simple. And it was precisely because of this that when he was prepared to perform, he would hypnotize himself in advance. By using the Staff of the Stars in a special state, he would preserve the ability to summon historical void images like Miss Messenger, Mr. Azek, Ma'am Ariana, Will Septon, and other familiar angels. Holding the black staff that was embedded with various gems, a scene of the door slowly opening appeared in Klein's mind. The gems on the staff flashed with a faint glow as the grayish-white fog quickly outlined a door that wasn't sufficiently real. The door opened silently, and behind it was still a gray fog. Door opening doesn't work. Although he wasn't surprised by the outcome, he was still a little disappointed. He thought for a moment and decided to switch tactics. However, just as he was thinking about it, the Staff of the Stars automatically activated as the corresponding scene appeared. Chapter 12:12 Spreading Radiance. Just now, as Klein was thinking of a solution, an image naturally came to mind. The clouds in the 2 mountains began to boil rapidly as they spread out to the left and right, revealing a crack whose bottom couldn't be seen. The orange-red rays of the sunset filled it and formed a corporeal path. This was a scene created when Blasphemer Amon entered the projection of the Giant King's court. And just as he felt that he didn't know enough about the corresponding powers and planned on switching to another method. The red, green, blue, and transparent gems on the staff of the stars had already begun to emit a faint glow as they automatically activated. The solidified grayish-white fog was similarly boiling, but it wasn't that intense. They were churning backward as they parted, but the area right in front of him remained an endless grayish-white mass. There was no end to it. Klein sighed in his heart. As he focused on controlling his thoughts, he made other attempts. In the past 3 minutes, he had tried hard at least 10 times. 7 times were of his own will, while 3 times were him venting out, but he was ultimately unable to open the invisible barrier. Indeed, normal methods don't work. With a flick of his wrist, he allowed the historical projection of 0 to 62, which was close to its limit, to disappear from the real world. He stared at the silent grayish-white fog and didn't move for about a minute. It was as if he had turned into a statue. Finally, Klein closed his eyes and looked away. Holding the lantern in his hand, he walked towards the nearby humans who were watching. He didn't plan on making blind attempts, because there was a high chance that he wouldn't succeed. He planned on asking the people who had stood guard in the vicinity for 2,000 to 3,000 years. It was obvious that these ancient survivors had explored the grayish-white fog. He wanted to see if he could find inspiration from their years of experience. Based on Klein's assumption, the humans would definitely react excessively towards him, so he had already prepared the corresponding powers to allow them to speak to him calmly. However, when he looked at the light of dusk on both sides of the lantern, he realized that the ugly or deformed humans were staring at him with their mouths agape. They looked confused and shocked, as if they had temporarily lost their ability to think. Klein frowned slightly. In the darkness, he walked unhurriedly to the ancient survivors and stopped about 2 to 3 meters away. "What do you know about this fog?" Klein asked in Jotun with a deep voice. The language that could stir the powers of nature didn't have any differences because of geography. There was only a slight difference in the accent, but it wasn't much. If the original version was modified, there was a chance its effects in ritualistic magic would be lost. It was only when Gehrman Sparrow raised the question that Adal seemed to snap out of his daze. His lips quivered as he answered in an ambiguous tone, We have never caused the fog to change before. Just now, Gehrman Sparrow had caused the fog to boil like water and part to the sides. This scene had really frightened them, as though they were witnessing a miracle. The 2,000 to 3,000 years of hard work from numerous generations of Moon City inhabitants were inferior to a person holding a staff with an attempt that didn't last more than 200 heartbeats. This was also the main reason why they had given up on resisting when Gehrman Sparrow approached them. They instinctively believed that, no matter how they avoided him, it would be to no avail. After 2 seconds of silence, Klein continued asking, "Do you have any corresponding records?" At this moment, Adal understood what Gehrman Sparrow meant. He hesitated for a moment and slowly nodded. Yes. However, only the high priest and the others would frequently look through it. Wearing a black trench coat and half-top hat, Klein thought for a moment and suddenly reached out to pull out an item from the void. It was a cross covered in bronze, with several sharp spikes protruding out from it. It was the historical image of the ancient sun god's unshadowed crucifix. With the cross in hand, Klein raised it a little higher and aimed it at the ancient survivors. Pure, bright, and warm light bloomed, dispersing the darkness around them and illuminating them. Their combat experience made them instinctively attempt to defend themselves, but their actions stopped midway through the process. The brightness and warmth wasn't something a bonfire could compare with. This made the remaining members of the Moon City hunting team recall the deities described by the ancient books and the high priest. They were deities who emitted boundless light and brought boundless warmth. Under the illumination of the bright, pure light, a distorted, struggling illusionary black gas that seemed to have a life of its own began to boil from the bodies of Adal, Xiaofan, and company, quickly rising and dissipating. The members of the Moon City hunting team felt their bodies become more relaxed, and the pressure within their souls disappeared. After purging the cumulative corruption and ailments of their bodies, Klein shook his wrist slightly, causing the unshadowed crucifix to disappear in front of him. Right on the heels of that, he grabbed another cane that looked an ordinary wooden color. This was the former City of Silver's sealed artifact, Life's Cane. Although he had already sacrificed it to the Evernight goddess, as long as it was once owned by a scholar of yore, it would only accompany them in a different way. With Life's Cane in hand, Klein took a few steps forward and used the end of the cane to tap the leader of Moon City's hunting team. The experience from before made Adal unable to dodge. The tumors on his face began to crack as pus flowed, faded, and disappeared. In the end, there wasn't even a single scar left. From the looks of his team members, Adal knew that he had undergone a change. He hesitantly raised his right hand and touched his face. From top to bottom and back up again, he kept repeating it. During this process, he realized that he was in an unprecedented healthy state, one that was better than when he first became an adult. Klein didn't look at him. He took a step diagonally and used Life's Cane to treat the rest of the ancient survivors. With Adal as an example, Xiaofan and the others were on their guard and alert as they accepted contact with the cane, and they felt that they had obtained a new lease of life. Amongst them, the two deformed beings who were easily emotional couldn't help but tear up. Unfortunately, I can't treat natural defects. Mental illnesses can be treated, but some crazy tendencies can't be treated. Klein retracted his right hand and let the historical projection of Life's Cane disappear. He walked to his original spot and turned around. He looked at the ancient survivors and said, "I'm not here to destroy, but to spread the radiance of my Lord, bringing light and warmth. Go back and tell your leader that I'm here. If he's willing, he can come over." He didn't attempt to find out where the gathering point of these ancient survivors was, nor did he plan on going there directly. This would trigger the strongest form of resistance and vigilance. Hence, giving them the choice was the most suitable solution. At that moment, Adal, Xiaofan, and the others were already shocked by Gehrman Sparrow's constant pulling out of mystical items. They felt that they were walking into a miracle and had already been cleansed by the divine light, allowing their physical condition to recover to its optimum state. It even exceeded their peak. "All right." A few seconds later, Adal responded. Just as they turned around and prepared to return to Moon City, flames lit up from the depths of the darkness as they rapidly approached. The leader was an old man wearing a dark brown beast hide. His hair was gray and unkempt, and his face was full of real cracks. "High Priest," after recognizing the other party, Xiaofan blurted out. It was none other than Moon City's High Priest, Nim. Behind Nim followed Russ and the other members of the hunting team who had returned to the city ahead of time, as well as several other high-sequence Beyonders. Nim nodded at Adal, Xiaofan, and the rest before walking to the front of the group. Looking at the man who claimed to be a missionary, Gehrman Sparrow, he crossed his arms and bowed. "Honorable guest, I am Moon City's High Priest, Nim. Moon City once belonged to vampires, but that civilization had been destroyed in ancient times. Afterwards, we accepted the orders of the great Sun God, the Lord who created everything, and we moved here to watch the grayish-white fog and make the corresponding attempts. That continued on even though the land was cursed and the Lord didn't respond to us. To date, 3,722 years have passed." Chapter 12-13 The Eternally Imperturbable Fog 3,722 years. Indeed, they were sent here when the ancient sun god was still alive. With the City of Silver's continued survival in the darkness for more than 2,000 years as a reference, Klein easily confirmed the words of Moon City's High Priest. He nodded slightly and asked, "Are you guarding this fog to prevent any anomalies from happening to it?" The High Priest of Moon City, who was wrapped in dark brown beast hide, Nim, shook his head. "The revelation that the Lord gave us was to guard the area all day. We needed to know if anyone walks out of the fog. Walks out of the fog. The ancient sun god had a premonition that a person would walk out of this fog. If the other side of the fog is really the Western continent, does this mean that there might still be life and civilization in it? When Klein heard this, an indescribable palpitation struck his heart, but he deeply realized a certain reality: Amon's father, the second creator, was actually unable to open this grayish-white fog, and even needed to send people here to watch over it. Is there a specific method needed to pass through this invisible barrier? Mr. Hanged Man mentioned before that the Queen of Calamity, Kohainam, said that an incantation or command might be needed. Also, the premise is that the Western continent has already resurfaced. As Klein looked at the high priest with deep lines on his face, he said without batting an eyelid, "I believe they have already introduced me to you. I'm a missionary. I have come to this land to spread the light of the Lord." The high priest of Moon City, Nim, maintained his composure and used his gray eyes that were the same color as his long hair to look at Klein. "Your Excellency, which existence do you believe in?" Klein instinctively wanted to answer directly, but considering his identity as a missionary that he had set for himself previously, he held back his shame. With the ability of a clown, he controlled his facial muscles and revealed a slightly fanatical expression. "Please permit me to introduce you to my lord, the savior of this land, the great Mr. Fool, the Fool." Moon City's high priest, Nim, and the others didn't expect to hear such a word. For a moment, they found it strange, but for some reason, they felt that there was an infinite philosophy hidden within. Finally, their attention was focused on the description, the savior of this land. Nim couldn't help but turn his head to look at Adal and the rest, observing their radiant faces. As a Sequence 4 demigod, he knew very well that this was a result of the cleansing of the toxin and corruption accumulated within their bodies. Furthermore, the members of the hunting team had also been given excellent treatment. If he hadn't seen this group of young people grow up and remembered how they looked before the changes, he definitely wouldn't dare to confirm that they were residents of Moon City. Seeing the high priest look over, Adal immediately said excitedly, "His Excellency Sparrow prayed for a deity's blessing to save us. Yes, we saw light. We felt warmth." Xian, who was without a nose, added. After the catharsis, she had unknowingly developed a certain belief towards the Lord that Gehrman Sparrow mentioned. Compared to the Creator who had never responded to prayers and ignored the suffering that Moon City faced, this existence was more like a deity. Russ and another member of the hunting team that went back to Moon City to inform the high priest looked covetously at their former companions. They were both envious and had a yearning for the new life they had obtained. The high priest, Nim, retracted his gaze and looked at Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing strange clothes and a strange hat. "Is the great Mr. Fool a deity in this world? No, from outside this cursed land?" Klein nodded solemnly and slowly. "Yes." "Then, what about the great sun god who created everything?" Nim hesitated for a moment before asking the question he desired answers to the most. Klein changed his tone to that of a charlatan and said, "The kings betrayed that existence. Blood, anger, foulness, and shadows began to flow across this land, triggering a huge calamity." Nim's pupils dilated slightly, as if he wanted to absorb more light to see the world in front of him. With great difficulty, he tried his best to suppress something and asked, "Are you saying that the Lord perished because of this?" Not only did he perish, but his flesh and blood were also eaten by the traitors. This piece of land was cursed as a result. Taking advantage of the fact that he was in the forsaken land of the gods, Klein boldly said this. He didn't deliberately distinguish the Amon brothers from the other 6 kings of angels. He planned on making the residents of Moon City believe that all the kings of angels were traitors. This way, they wouldn't be fooled by Amon in the future. Over the past half a year of traveling and the various experiments he undertook, he was convinced that the forsaken land of the gods really was sealed. Or rather, it was isolated from the outside world. The only point of contact was either the exit of the giant king's court, or something at the level of Sapphira Castle. Therefore, using the staff of the stars here allowed him to move within the confines of the cursed land. He was unable to head to the scenes in the outside world as outlined in his mind. In addition, the box of the Great Old Ones was even suppressed and isolated for its historical projection. The moment the summoning succeeded, the projection would immediately be devoured by the environment. It was completely useless. This made him suspect that even the third level of the box of the Great Old Ones was a little dangerous for true deities such as the true Creator. Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow's words, the body of the High Priest of Moon City, Nim, trembled slightly as his pockmarked face instantly turned ashen. The faces of the Beyonders behind him changed as well. It was as if they had suffered an extremely serious blow. One even showed signs of losing control. Seeing this, Klein reached out his hand again and pulled out Life's cane from the void, allowing it to fly through the air and accurately tap the target. The signs of the Beyonders losing control immediately vanished. His forehead was covered in sweat as if he had just overcome a major illness. Following the removal of the historical projection, Life's cane quickly faded away. As for the Beyonders of Moon City, they finally managed to break free from the grievous news. Some of them were filled with suspicion and disbelief, and others were whimpering softly. Some looked at Gehrman Sparrow with a lost look, as though he was their final hope. At some point in time, Nim's eyes had already closed. 2 or 3 seconds later, he opened them again and looked at Gehrman Sparrow. "What else do you have to ask?" In less than a minute, he looked like he had aged considerably. His body was beginning to show signs of decay and depression. However, it wasn't completely without hope. It was as if the trees were rotting away, but they were beginning to give birth to new lives. Klein half-turned and pointed at the coagulated gray fog with the lantern in his hand. "Since when did you begin attempting to open this screen? What did you achieve?" Nim said frankly, "In the beginning, it was the Lord's revelation. While he wanted us to watch over it, he also wanted us to think of a way to pass through the fog. After the land was cursed, we used this to mainly guide us so as to seek hope. However, we ultimately didn't achieve anything concrete. No matter what method we used, the solidified mist didn't react." Upon saying that, he hesitated and said, "It's not that there's no reaction, but it wasn't the reaction we wanted." Klein instantly saw hope and maintained his normal speaking pace as he asked, "What was the reaction?" Seeing that the High Priest was somewhat hesitant and not answering immediately, Xian took the initiative to say, "High Priest, His Excellency Sparrow has already parted a portion of the fog, a depth deeper than what we managed over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years." Nim couldn't help but look deeply at Gehrman Sparrow before saying, "More than 1,730 years ago, the High Priest back then was inspired by the cruel fact that Moon City had failed to achieve anything in the past 2,000 years. He felt that we couldn't treat this fog as a seal that needed to be broken through. Instead, it was to be treated as a great existence. He designed the honorific name, prayer stanza, and the corresponding symbols for this fog. He held repeated rituals here, attempting communication, and praying. This is a train of thought that no normal person would have thought of. I didn't think of it just now. Indeed, after all these years, there must have been many people with strange ideas in Moon City. 3,000 years of time isn't for nothing." Klein sighed inwardly as he nodded slightly. "Was there any feedback after that?" With a nasal grunt as confirmation, Nim replied, "There was at one point when the High Priest changed the first sentence of the honorific name to the eternally imperturbable fog. Then, during the subsequent ritual, he vaguely heard a series of voices coming from deep within the fog. Unfortunately, he couldn't hear it clearly no matter how hard he tried, making it impossible to interpret it. From then on, the rituals we held were uncountable. We realized that a response wasn't always guaranteed. Even if there was a response, it might not be a timely one. We needed to wait patiently." As the thoughts raced through his mind, Klein asked, how many times does it roughly take to succeed? There are no patterns. Sometimes, we succeed at once. Sometimes, we might not receive any feedback after a month, Nim said with a sigh. We have made many alterations, but they were all useless. Did you hear what those voices said afterward? Klein asked. No, maybe our sequence isn't high enough or we are still lacking in strength. Nim shook his head. If that's the reason, I can give it a try. After hesitating for a few seconds, he politely asked, may you hold the correct ritual again? I would like to hear those voices. This kind of politeness was something Nim couldn't refuse, nor did he dare to refuse. He hesitated for a moment and said, sure, but many of the materials are in Moon City. You need to wait for some time. After some thought, Klein asked, have you used those materials before? Yes, Nimue answered in confusion. Klein nodded indifferently. Let's just hold it now. Tell me when was the last time you used those materials and where they were nearby. Chapter 12:14 Voice/B. After hearing the high priest's reply, Klein held his lantern and walked 20 to 30 steps to the right, parallel to the grayish-white fog. Then, he half closed his eyes as though he was sensing something. This made the Moon City Beyonders behind him not dare to make a sound, afraid of disturbing the oracle. After 4 to 5 seconds, Klein stretched out his right hand and slowly grabbed the air ahead. An altar made of stone dropped into the real world. On it were 3 candles made of oil and 7 to 8 spiritual materials. As a sequence 4 demigod, Nim was taken aback. He found it difficult to believe his eyes. Previously, he had seen Gehrman Sparrow take out his cane to treat his companion. He had only believed that Gehrman Sparrow possessed the powers of space or had received the favor of Mr. Fool. But now, his judgment had been completely overturned. This was because he found the altar, the few candles, and the spiritual materials very familiar. They were all used by him once. He actually managed to create something that I've used before. Is this a power that comes from history, a power that comes from time? Nim recalled the content of the remnant tomes in Moon City, and his understanding of demigods as he came to a preliminary guess. At that moment, Klein turned around and looked at the high priest. You may begin. Nim quietly drew a deep breath. Under the watchful eyes of the likes of the Adal, Xian, and Russ, he walked to the altar and created a wall of spirituality. After taking a look at the symbols, labels, and patterns engraved on the altar and confirming that there were no problems, he followed the process that had been engraved into his memories, and he began the ritual with great familiarity. In the end, he bowed his head and chanted in a low voice, the eternally imperturbable fog, a barrier frozen in spacetime, the existence that contains everything. Before the prayer ended, Klein had already placed his attention on the grayish-white fog, hoping to hear sounds coming from deep within. For this, he had secretly controlled the large number of monster marionettes that walked in the surrounding darkness to separate. He spaced them out at a certain distance, hoping that he wouldn't miss any suspicious traces. However, he didn't notice anything unusual until the ritual was completed. After waiting for a while more, Klein cast his gaze at the high priest of Moon City, Nim, and said calmly, one more time. Backlund, Empress Burrow, in the Hall family's study. After receiving permission, Audrey pushed open the door and walked in. Her father, Earl Hall, and her brother, Hibbert, were discussing some matters. Oh, baby, you don't look too well. Earl Hall cast his gaze towards the door. Audrey didn't act as she forced a smile and said, there's a huge lack of food at the Poverty Relief Foundation. I would like to collect more. I visited many nobles today, but they told me that there's no more food left. It's the same even if I offered to buy it with gold pounds. When these words were said, the nobles were either in a parlor or at a spot specially used for high tea. In front of them were high-quality black tea and many exquisite desserts. From time to time, they would invite Audrey to evaluate their dessert chef's culinary skills. Their servants had rosy cheeks, and they took very light footsteps. They didn't make a sound to prevent disturbing their guests. The current situation, Earl Hall sighed when he heard that. Audrey thought for a moment and said seriously, "Father, I remember that there should be quite a lot of food at home. Can I buy some of that with money?" "Audrey, you've already done too much. There's no need for you to do more," Hibbert Hall said with a frown. As for Audrey, she only looked at her father and didn't respond to her elder brother's words. Earl Hall's expression that had relaxed after seeing his daughter became serious again. "Audrey, the prerequisite for charity is not to affect your and your family's life. This is a principle I wish for you to remember." Audrey, who was wearing a long, golden white dress, relaxed her eyebrows and said sincerely, "Father, the amount of food we have stored at home is enough to last everyone in this house for an entire year, or even more. Besides, there's also a lot of food over in Eastchester County." As Winter County hadn't completely fallen, the Faysac army that had invaded Mid-Seashire didn't attack Eastchester County. As for the Faysac, Intis, and Fanapotter fleet, they were suppressed by the few ironclad warship fleets of Lone. They could only barely deal with the situation and protect the supply line at sea. Seeing his daughter's emerald green eyes for a few seconds, he suddenly sighed and smiled. "Audrey, you have really grown up. You have your own ideas and pretty commendable determination. However, we don't know how long this war will last. We don't know what the outcome will be. We have to leave a lot of food to deal with this. I can accept us having 2 less delicacies for every meal to help those who are in trouble, but I don't want my dining table to become like what the newspaper says about the middle class. This will completely make us lose our dignity as nobles. This is something that we abide with every generation. Do you understand what I mean? I was just making an analogy. The essence of this is that I value the continuation and the future of the family line more. I value our status and standing. Only when it doesn't affect them will I express my love and kindness. Audrey, what I said may be cruel, but you have already grown up. It's time to hear this. Everyone is selfish, but at varying levels. In my heart, the entire Hall family is more important than me and your mother, yourself, Hibbert, and Alfred. Apart from these, it will first be Faith and good friends. Next, it's people we are acquainted with. Finally, it would be all of Backland, those who are in need of help. If it doesn't affect the ones first listed, I don't mind helping them. Unfortunately, I have to consider even more things now." At this point, Earl Hall shook his head in a self-deprecating manner. "I'm sorry to let you know that your father is such a selfish person." As Audrey listened to her father's words, her expression changed slightly at first, but then it disappeared. Until the end, there were no additional emotions. At that moment, she was silent for a moment before asking again, "But we've already obtained a lot more than what we need. Can't we even share a portion of it?" Hibbert Hall interrupted angrily, "Why are you giving away the things we painstakingly obtained to others? This is produced from our land, farmland, and forests. This is what we bought with money. And these funds and assets were passed down the family. It was earned by Father's acumen and powerful charisma. It was accumulated over generations. By doing charity to help others, it's an additional display of love, not something that we have to do you understand?" Earl Hall nodded. "What Hibbert said is generally right. I share his thoughts as well." Audrey pursed her lips and slowly nodded. "I understand." Earl Hall retracted his gaze and said to Hibbert, "We have to keep the food stored properly. If the outcome of the war cannot be reversed, try contacting the fellows from Intis and show them some of our sincerity. The battle has been going on for so long. Quite a number of people have died as well. Many fields have been abandoned, and the prices in the cities have soared. There must be a very high demand for food, cattle, and land. In addition, I have shares in the Intis Suchet Bank, as well as the shares in the Varvat Bank and Backlund Bank. I should be able to bribe them. Heh. In such times, only by satisfying these aspects can we talk about familial relationships. Intis and Lone often had marriage alliances. Many nobles were relatives, especially the believers of the god of steam. Father, are you considering surrendering? Hibbert asked in surprise. Earl Hall nodded slightly and sighed again. How can I not consider it in light of the current situation? When the time comes, you will be the new Earl Hall. Hibbert's heart palpitated when he heard that, but he was also puzzled. What about you, father? Earl Hall replied with a bitter smile, both your mother and I are devout believers. We have a certain status in the church. When Lone falls and the church is destroyed, the outcome will not be good if we're still unwilling to step down. At this point, he comforted his eldest son. As long as the Hall family is still around and the aristocratic title is still there, we won't lose much of our core assets. We won't be in such a miserable state for our advanced years. Remember to prepare a secret prayer room for us at home after you convert your faith to the god of steam. As the two of them conversed, Audrey, who was wearing a long, golden white dress, watched quietly from the door. She was listening quietly, her green eyes shimmering like gems. After repeated attempts, the projection of the altar vanished. The high priest of Moon City, Nim, said to Gehrman Sparrow, who was holding the strange lantern, in deliberation, "It looks like it won't work today. We can try it tomorrow. It won't last more than 2 months." At that moment, all Klein could think of was another question: could it be that the ritual was unsuccessful since it appears too perfunctory using historical void projections? He reflected on himself deeply and decided to listen to the high priest. They could try again tomorrow. When the time came, he would definitely get him to bring the real materials. He was about to nod when he heard a faint voice. The voice sounded from deep within the grayish-white fog. It was layered and indistinct. It's effective? This ritual really does have an effect, but the delay is too great. Klein was delighted as he immediately raised his right hand and pressed down slightly, gesturing for the Beyonders of Moon City to be silent. He immediately held his breath and focused on listening. The voice that echoed within the grayish-white fog seemed to come from many different sources. They intertwined with each other, occasionally overlapping with each other in destructive interference and creating a resonance when in constructive interference. Gradually, the voice became clearer in Klein's ears, especially when it resonated. It seemed to be a language he was familiar with. It seemed like countless people were chanting a name together. The name was, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Chapter 12:15 Not time ye, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. When he heard the voices deep in the grayish-white mist, Klein trembled slightly as the back of his head turned numb. This feeling quickly spread to every part of his body, causing tiny goosebumps to protrude on his skin. This was the second time he had heard the name, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, in the real world. And the first time, it was said by Amon after he stole his thoughts. In fact, Amon didn't know the exact meaning behind it, nor did he truly grasp the incantation. Therefore, in essence, this was the first time. At the borders of the legendary Western continent, outside his hometown that had vanished, this was the first time that he heard the incantation that caused him to transmigrate into the real world. He heard one of the most important secrets hidden at the bottom of his heart and heard the oriental honorific name that was pointed at an unknown existence. He stood there, his mind almost blank. His ears echoed with occasional sounds of chanting and shouting. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. When the voices became softer and softer until they almost disappeared, Klein finally recovered his train of thought. As a fake god that had done a lot of guilty matters, his first reaction was, by changing the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings to the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, will I suffer divine punishment? Back when he had set up the 3-stanza honorific name of the fool, the first stanza described his experience and state. Back then, he had thought that it was a transmigration, and he was afraid of exposing the problem. He had changed the fool from an alternate world to the fool that doesn't belong to this era, but in the end, it pointed to his true nature. The second stanza was to bind the gray fog to him, making the direction clearer. And in order to completely limit and not cause any ambiguity, Klein directly translated the last line of the incantation, which was, "The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings." He originally thought that it was nothing, but later on, he suspected that his transmigration was a result of the former owner of the strange door of light in Sapphira Castle, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Or rather, it was a certain existence hiding their true identity. Of course, it was also possible that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings was the actual incarnation before creating another identity that suited the present world. As for what the identity was, Klein wasn't sure. This was because he had never heard the honorific name of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings elsewhere in the real world. Therefore, although there was suspicion and fear present, he didn't actually pay too much attention to it. It seemed like he was already used to it. However, at that moment, the words, "the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings," were like salvos that kept blasting at his heart, bombarding his mind, causing all the concerns and fear that he had accumulated in his subconscious to surge out. After regaining his composure, he began to force himself to use his rationality to think about his current situation. Is this chanting hidden in the grayish-white fog, or is it from the vanished western continent? I already thought that this fog's color and state is very close to the one below Sapphira Castle. Its power comes from history. One has to have the correct powers over time to open it. Queen of Calamity Kohinum once said that the western continent would definitely reappear at the dawn of the apocalypse. In other words, only by pushing time towards that temporal node would the grayish-white fog come alive. Only then would it be possible to use the corresponding incantation to open it. The person who made the western continent vanish, seal it, or create a protective quarantine, is the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, the existence suspected to be the previous owner of Sapphira Castle? According to all the clues, Sapphira Castle and the rest were left behind by the original creator. They were created by the various parts of his body or something that he personally created. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings is equivalent to the former owner of Sapphira Castle, and also equivalent to the original creator. However, Sapphira Castle existed only after the original creator split. Furthermore, the chants of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings only point to Sapphira Castle and don't affect places like the Chaos Sea. Also, the disappearance of the western continent is definitely something from before the Second Epoch. As an ancient god, even Elf King Sanayathrim was unable to return to his hometown. In other words, in the chaotic and crazy First Epoch or even before then, the original creator, the oldest one, had split into objects like Chaos Sea and Sapphira Castle. More things happened before the ancient gods were born. These matters caused the western continent to vanish, and the former owner of Sapphira Castle to disappear. The prophecy of the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator, is also very interesting. It says that someone will walk out of this grayish-white fog, so he sent people to stay in Moon City and guard this place. Strictly speaking, I actually come from the western continent or this grayish-white fog. However, I left the western continent to enter Sapphira Castle in a time long before the ancient sun god's prediction. The year I left the grayish-white fog was 1349 and found myself in Lone. Yes, after going around in circles, I came here again and met with the people from Moon City. The ancient sun god's prophecy really has come true. It's just that the process is a little twisted and complicated, but the way it was achieved is rather unexpected. As he pondered, his mood gradually improved. This was because the situation at the scene and his spiritual intuition had told him that there were still civilizations in the western continent that were isolated by the grayish-white fog. Many people were still alive. This method of making the western continent vanish reminds me of the ritual for Miracle Invoker, as well as using the power of space-time. They are mainly from the Apprentice and Marauder pathways. So, the previous owner of Sapphira Castle, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, corresponds to these three neighboring pathways? Klein reined in his thoughts as he took 2 steps forward. He then turned around and said to Nim and the rest, "I heard the voice clearly. What are they saying?" Nim's grayish-white eyes suddenly widened, his deeply pockmarked face filled with excitement. Adal, Xian, Russ, and company had similar reactions, ones that were even more intense. Even their bodies began to tremble. This was a problem that had troubled the residents of Moon City for more than 1,000 years. Resolving this problem was a symbol of escaping their current predicament. Klein took a deep breath and said in the tone of a charlatan, "They are praying to my lord." This was definitely not a lie. After all, as the fool, he had already gained initial mastery of Sapphira Castle. The last sentence of his honorific name was the King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck, which was equivalent to the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Nim and company fell silent. When they looked back at Klein, their eyes were filled with obvious respect and fear. Together with the miracles Klein had displayed, they gradually viewed Mr. Fool as their savior. Klein surveyed the area and said, "Retreat at least 100 meters. "All right, Your Excellency." The High Priest, Nim, agreed without hesitation. After the Moon City's beyonders had retreated to a sufficient distance, Klein reached into the void with his right hand and quickly dragged out another projection of himself as his actual body disappeared. Right on the heels of that, the historical void projection of Klein walked to the front of the solidified grayish-white fog. He extended his right hand and pressed it down. It was as if there was an invisible barrier that was slightly cold, blocking everything. After staring at it for 2 seconds, Klein opened his mouth, suppressed his voice, and recited in Chinese, "The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings." As his voice echoed out, the grayish-white fog in front of him didn't react at all. It remained still and frozen. He waited for nearly a minute. After some thought, he took a deep breath and muttered again, "The immortal Lord of heaven and earth for blessings, the Sky Lord of heaven and earth for blessings, the exalted the Arch of heaven and earth for blessings, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings." This was the complete incantation of the luck enhancement ritual. As the last word was said, Klein's right hand that was pressing on the invisible barrier suddenly felt an obvious tremble. The gray fog began to shake as though a boulder had been thrown into a lake. The ripples quickly spread, overlapping each other as they formed a door in front of him. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the scene. Not far away, the pupils of the Moon City beyonders widened as they were unable to shift their eyes away. Amongst them, the ones who arrived later felt their hearts waver after witnessing such a scene. They found it impossible to contain themselves. To them, this was undoubtedly a miracle. Klein held his breath as he waited for the door to take shape. However, the ripples finally calmed down. They were only a step away from success. After a moment of silence, Klein repeated the incantations again. However, even if the ripples in the grayish-white fog didn't disappear, they were unable to truly outline the door. For a moment, he wanted to attempt with the complete ritual procedure. In other words, he would place 4 portions of food and recite the incantations while taking 4 steps counterclockwise. But very quickly, he was amused by his idea. Because by doing this, he would enter Sapphira Castle without opening the invisible barrier here. After exhaling, Klein took out a gold coin from the void and used divination to confirm that the effects of the complete ritual would be as he imagined. It really isn't time yet because the apocalypse hasn't dawned on us. Klein looked at the grayish-white fog in front of him for a few minutes without any movement. When a bolt of lightning tore through the sky and illuminated his face, he turned around and walked in front of the Moon City High Priest, Nim, with the lantern in hand. He said calmly, "It hasn't reached the correct point in time to open it, as spoken in the Revelation. There's more than a decade of waiting left." Without waiting for any response from the likes of Nim, Adal, and the rest, Klein pointed to the nearby darkness with his empty right hand. "I will be meditating here for some time. If you want to experience the radiance of the Lord and listen to His teachings, you can come here anytime whenever the lightning frequency is high. I'll do a single purification and treatment session every day, at a time when the lightning is most frequent." He didn't attempt to get the residents of Moon City to convert their faiths, nor did he plan on heading directly to the city or ask about any specific information. He wanted to give them some time to take things in. Nim secretly heaved a sigh of relief and replied with increasingly great respect, "I will pass on your words to everyone." Chapter 12:16 Patience will ultimately pay off. City of Silver, at the top of the spire, in the chief's room. With white hair and an old scar on his face, Colin Iliad looked out of the window at the deep darkness. It was only when a silvery white light suddenly burst out from afar, bringing a few seconds of light, that he retracted his gaze and nodded slightly. Chermont has succeeded in advancing. His gaze landed on the 2-meter-tall youth standing in the middle of the room. "Derek, do you know why I kept delaying the subsequent plans and didn't implement them after the first exploration of the Giant King's Court, despite already becoming a Sequence 3 Silver Knight?" Derek thought for a moment and said, "Your Excellency, on the one hand, you wish to see if there are any other paths you can take to the seaside. On the other hand, you are waiting for the other elders of the 6-member council to advance to Sequence 3. And now, both matters were completed. Nearly 5 months ago, an expedition team of the City of Silver discovered a hidden path. From there, they circled around the mountain where the Giant King's Court was located, and they arrived at the sea. However, the sea was illusory, and there was no way to pass through it. Forcefully entering the water only caused bodies to gradually crumble. Now, another demigod of the 6-member council, Waite Chermont, had finally advanced, becoming a Sequence 3 Silver Knight. He could have an honorific name and receive the prayers of the other residents of the City of Silver within a certain range. Colin Iliad sighed and said, "Very good. You have a very well-rounded understanding of the situation. If I had a choice, I truly do not wish to bring you to the Giant King's Court again and attempt to open the palace where Dark Angel lays in slumber." At this point, Demon Hunter Colin paused for a moment before continuing, "I do not know what danger such an expedition will bring. I can only make ample preparations in advance. Now, Chermont has finally succeeded. Even if an accident happens later and we are unable to return, he and the other elders will be able to support the City of Silver, allowing everything to continue on as we await the next opportunity." He sized up Derek for a few seconds before nodding in acknowledgement. "Your growth is even better than I expected. If not for the fact that the Giant King's Court matter originated because of you, I'd really want to keep you in the City of Silver and be an understudy elder of the 6-member council." Upon hearing this, Derek Berg replied without hesitation, "Even if you wish to keep me here in the City of Silver, I would still apply to go." This was a glimmer of hope that he had seen. This was an opportunity in his heart that could save the City of Silver. He was willing to sacrifice everything for it. Colin Iliad gave a rare smile. "You are still too young. After you experience many things like me, you will understand that compared to drawing your sword and sacrificing your blood in a zealous fervor, enduring humiliation and helplessness, and persisting in the darkness is even more difficult and painful. If you don't believe me, you can ask Chermont later. Ask him if he is willing to lead an expedition team to the Giant King's Court, or stay in the City of Silver." Derek fell into silence, his mouth agape, but not a single word came out of it. Colin Iliad didn't continue on this topic and instead asked, "Have you completely digested the Priest of Light potion?" "I digested it completely last week," Derek replied frankly. Colin Iliad nodded and said, "Have you gathered all the supplementary ingredients?" Derek acknowledged tersely. "I've gathered all of them. I'm just short of preparing the ritual." His ritual required him to extract the strongest emotions that he was unwilling to abandon, before injecting them again after consuming the potion. After a few gatherings with the Tarot Club, as well as Miss Justice's private attempts, they had already come up with a well-formulated plan. He was to complete it by relying on this sequence for Manipulator's control of the Psyche domain, and Mr. Fool's Angel's embrace. Demon Hunter Colin didn't rush him as he calmly said, "Don't be anxious. The second exploration of the Giant King's court will still take some time." "Until I become an unshadowed?" Derek asked. Colin Iliad didn't deny it as he nodded slightly. "I'm also waiting for Lovia to become a Black Knight. Her ingredients and ritual have been prepared." Upon hearing this, Derek immediately felt pressured. At the capital of the Rorstad Archipelago, City of Generosity, Byam. At the top of the bell tower of the City of Generosity. The Cardinal of the Church of Storms, the high-ranking deacon of the mandated punishers, Sea King John Cotman, stood behind the railing, looking at the sea which was no longer that blue. There was wreckage floating above it, burning with the remains of ships. "Humph, in my territory at sea, even a war bishop has to bow his head," the muscular demigod with a chiseled face retracted his gaze as he muttered. He had a head of dark blue hair and a pair of deep blue eyes that were as thick as a worm. He controlled the weather and sea around the Rorstad Archipelago. Alger Wilson, who was standing beside the Sea King, didn't show any signs of frustration. He patiently waited until John Cotman turned his attention onto him. Aside from most of the Beyonders of the Sailor Pathway being bad-tempered, they often trembled in submission when facing high-sequence Beyonders of the same pathway. This was a characteristic of a tyrant. After muttering to himself, Sea King John Cotman finally cast his gaze at Alger, who was leading a pirate fleet. He said without any expression, "Your performance this time was remarkable. The Council of Cardinals has passed your review and has decided that I will preside over your advancement ritual." After receiving the item left behind by Queen of Calamity Kohinum, Alger found an opportunity to report the matter to Sea King John Cotman. Apart from 2 details that he modified, he had given an honest account of the exploration of the elven ruins from the time he arrived in the primitive forest of Sonia Island. Firstly, he claimed that he had headed for the elven ruins as part of him taking the initiative to ambush the Phasacian troops. They had specially looked for a suitable venue, and there were many sailors present to verify it. The second was to lessen the autonomy of the subsequent actions. He only claimed that he dreamed of a female high elf on the night of his exploration of the ruins. Nothing abnormal happened after he drank a glass of wine from her, so he hadn't paid too much attention to it. When he came to the Rorstad Archipelago and woke up one night from his sleep, he suddenly realized that he had entered a magnificent palace at the bottom of the sea, and had picked up a sparking coral. Although many aspects of the evidence and physical evidence had indicated that Alger's description was real, Sea King John Cotman didn't fully believe it. He was sent back to Pasu Island to be investigated by the Pontiff, Guard 2. With the help of Angel's Embrace, Alger looked like he was trembling in front of the tyrant's aura. Without holding back, he explained that he had developed a certain degree of ambition after meeting the female high elf in his dreams. For this, he had taken the initiative to head to the Rorstad Archipelago in hopes of receiving her inheritance, but in reality, he had covered up the core secrets and the most serious problem. He had used the method of confessing his ambition to pass the investigation. As for the female high elf, whether it was a result of him having some elven blood that a fortuitous encounter was given to him, or if she had any hidden motives, he claimed that he was unsure. He hoped that the Pontiff could figure out the answer to lessen his worries. Alger displayed his fear of the unknown, making the cardinals believe that this was the main reason why he had reported the fortuitous encounter. This proposal was designed by Alger himself, but with Miss Justice's suggestions, it was tweaked to be more in line with human nature. Of course, as expected, Alger didn't receive the advancement ritual. Instead, he entered an inspection period. The pontiff of the Church of Storms, the grounded angel, had reinforced the seal in Alger's body, preventing the cataclysmic interior characteristic from seeping out for 2 years and affecting him. In the past half a year, Alger had led the pirate fleet that had been assigned to him. He had worked hard to harass the ships of Faysac and Fainapotter. He had even participated in sea battles, taking great risks and making numerous contributions. This fully expressed his devotion to the Lord of Storms, as well as his submission to the orders given by the Church. Finally, after this worsted sea battle, the situation had escalated. His patience paid off as the Council of Cardinals acknowledged him. Alger took a deep breath and struck his right fist to his left breast, shouting loudly, "Holy Lord of Storms." His agitation was half an act, while the other half came from the bottom of his heart. This was because in the past half-year, he had suffered quite a bit of pressure. Ma'am Hermit had already finished digesting the mysticologist potion and was preparing to advance to sequence 3, clairvoyant. Although Miss Justice had yet to fully digest the manipulator potion, she had made significant progress. Furthermore, she was a complete rookie when she first joined the Tarot Club. Now, she had become a true demigod. She wasn't just a sequence higher than Alger, but a whole tier. Before long, the sun could advance to sequence 4, unshadowed, and obtain godhood. The star had also finished digesting the sequence 5 potion and had accumulated a significant amount of contributions. He was just waiting for the higher-ups to give him a chance. Miss Magician wasn't far from digesting her potion after traveling time and time again. Furthermore, her teacher had prepared the corresponding sequence for secret sorcerer ingredients for her. There was no need to mention the world Gehrman Sparrow. Even if he were to suddenly inform them that he was an angel, Alger wouldn't find it surprising. Miss Judgment was currently a sequence 5 disciplinary paladin. She was digesting the potion and was trying her best to keep up with everyone's progress. The moon, who didn't like to work hard, became anxious as a result and was seeking to become a sanguine earl. Faced with such a situation, as one of the most senior members of the Tarot Club, Alger naturally didn't wish to be left behind. He desperately wished to advance to sequence 4 and become a demigod. So many days had gone by, yet, he suppressed his anxiety and patiently waited. There were 2 instances where he showed signs of losing control which required him to hire Miss Justice to treat him. And now, he finally got the answer he wanted the most. He had passed the assessment and was to prepare for the ritual. Chapter 12-17 The 5 Mush and 2 Rooms Moon City. Many humans walked out of buildings which stood unusually sturdily despite having modeled surfaces. Some of them were obviously deformed, while others had already developed some abnormalities. The humans looked at each other and noticed some confusion on each other's faces. There were still 2 to 3 months before the sun sacrifice. Why was the high priest summoning everyone to the square? Could something have happened? The residents of Moon City were filled with anxiety, fear, and confusion as they entered the only square from every street. At this moment, the high platform was empty. The person who had convened them appeared to have not arrived. The residents of Moon City gathered together in a very orderly manner according to their respective zones, and they discussed amongst each other in whispers. Why isn't the high priest here yet? Doesn't he like to wait and not want others to wait for him? What happened exactly? Why did he suddenly gather all the city's residents aside from the guards? Visit website Our List Novel. Com. Amidst the voices, at the top of a tower near the square, High Priest Nim leaned against the wall and looked at the square from behind the crystal glass with a twisted expression as he endured something. His grayish-white hair flared up as a bunch of short black hair grew on his face. His ribs and waist were squirming, forming a swollen patch. These abnormal changes would disappear and occasionally appear. It was as if he was suffering from relapses again and again. His entire being was sinister and terrifying. After about a minute, he finally calmed down. He let out a long breath and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Just now, he had been resisting the madness that had accumulated in his body. In fact, no matter which beyonder pathway it was, the higher the sequence, the greater the insanity and inhuman inclinations one had. This gradually exceeded one's own humanity. One had to rely on external anchors to maintain a balance. Normally, such situations weren't obvious at sequence 4 and sequence 3. And at the level of an angel, even if there were enough anchors to stabilize them, they would fall into darkness from time to time. In the negative and abnormal states, one had to endure and resist on their own, waiting for them to ease up. They were like a sacred and solemn existence who might appear unproblematic normally. They could respond to prayers, chat normally, and even joke. However, at times, they could only hide in dark rooms and in the shadows. They tore off the surface of their skin, revealing a sinister side that showed signs of madness. As Nim often ate monster flesh, he had accumulated a lot of toxins, corruption, and madness. This forced him to endure such pain despite being a sequence 4. Of course, those who didn't know the acting method and relied on time or luck to advance to sequence 4 and sequence 3 would also share the same fate. After composing himself, he turned and left the room. With the help of an illusory door, he appeared on the high platform in the middle of the square. After the discussions died down, the residents of Moon City cast doubtful and uneasy gazes at the high priest. Nim looked around and directly said, "The hunting team led by Adal met an outsider." An outsider. The eyes of the residents of Moon City suddenly widened as though it was a bolt from out of the blue. This was the first time in 2,000 years for Moon City to encounter an outsider. Of course, this was referring to human interaction and not monsters. Nim took a deep breath and continued, "He claims to be a missionary who's here to spread the light of a deity. He caused the grayish-white fog to undergo obvious changes. He cleansed Adal and the others of the corruption and toxins accumulated within them. Also, he treated their physical mutations." As he spoke, he nodded to the side of the platform, and Adal and Xiaofan, who were hiding in the shadows, immediately passed through the row of torches and walked to his side, using their own conditions to prove what the high priest had just said. "Oh my God! Is that Adal and Xiaofan? They really," exclamations sounded out as surprise and shock mixed together into something almost physical. Adal and Xiaofan exchanged looks, took 2 steps forward, and recounted what their hunting team encountered. The crowd heard about the tiny flame that appeared in the darkness, the cross that emitted a bright light, the cane that could cure any mutations and ailments, the parting of the grayish-white fog, as well as the appearance of the door. Upon hearing the hunting team's delightful description of their excellent condition, the residents of Moon City gradually fell silent. Some of them had already unknowingly teared up, a result of the extreme fatigue and repression. Finally, they saw a ray of light. The tears carried a mild and salty feeling as they flowed past their faces, slipping across the corner of their lips and dripping onto the ground. In addition, a person who was still rational and clear-headed raised his arm to express his opinion. Could that missionary be a special monster from deep within the darkness? Are Adal and Xiaofan acting like this because they've already been controlled and influenced? After the wave of doubt calmed down, Nim said in a deep and clear voice, "I've checked them and have also used the sealed artifacts. I haven't found anything unusual for the time being. I will let them remain in the Black Tower and undergo at least 15 days of quarantine." After making the promise, he paused and said, "That missionary named Gehrman Sparrow will be meditating in the vicinity of the grayish-white fog for some time. He has permitted us to experience the glory of the God he believes in, and listen to the corresponding teachings. And every day, at the time when the lightning frequency is highest, he will provide cleansing and treatment. Everyone can make their own decision on heading over there, but they have to report their decision in advance and follow instructions. No one is to act on their own accord and affect the city's defenses. After they return, they will be quarantined for 15 days like Adal and Xian. The residents of Moon City fell silent. They looked at each other, unable to make up their minds. At this moment, Russ and another member of the hunting team, who had previously missed the cleansing and treatment because of their choice to return to inform the High Priest, stepped forward. "High Priest, I'm going." "Alright, I'll lead this team tomorrow." Nim nodded and agreed. He had originally planned to give this team a name, but he failed to come up with a good description. He could only stammer and skip it. In his heart, there was actually a name, but he didn't dare say it out loud. It was Pilgrimage. With Russ and company leading the way, several Moon City residents stood forward, indicating that they were willing to take the risk. When the frequency of lightning increased, it was the dawn of a brand new day. A group of 7 to 8 Moon City residents carried animal hide lanterns and began to traverse the darkness, heading towards the periphery of the grayish-white fog. After darkness and light exchanged countless times, Russ and company's eyes suddenly lit up. It was a bonfire that was slowly burning. Gehrman Sparrow, who was wearing strange clothes and a strange hat, was sitting around it. He held an iron-black long skewer and was roasting something. There were corpses of monsters lying around the bonfire. On these corpses, there were all sorts of strange objects. Some of them were white and full, as if they would spew out liquids the moment they were poked. Some of them were black, embedded with blood-colored lines and marbling. Some were covered with golden spots, while the tops were the size of a palm. These items were densely packed, covering the different parts of the monster's corpse. They had a strange and alluring beauty to them. After taking a few steps forward, High Priest Nim noticed that Gehrman Sparrow was roasting one of the strange objects. Drops of oil dripped down and produced sizzling sounds in the fire, brightening the light and allowing an alluring fragrance to spread. Gulp. The residents of Moon City swallowed their saliva instinctively as they developed an irresistible urge to eat. Every cell of theirs was screaming crazily, "I wish to eat it. I want to eat it. Give it to me." Sitting on a rock, Klein raised his head and pointed at the colorful objects growing on the corpses of the monsters around him. He said in a deep voice, "These are called mushrooms. They're divided into different types. If you're willing, you can pick and eat them yourself, but do not touch the black ones. Furthermore, they have to be thoroughly cooked before you can eat them. Otherwise, you will encounter a terrifying curse." The High Priest of Moon City thought for a moment and replied on behalf of the others, "We would like to first listen to your Lord's teachings and experience his radiance." With a slight nod, Klein said as he rotated the long barbecue skewer that he had summoned from the historical void, "You may sit down and listen." When the 8 Moon City residents sat opposite the bonfire, he said with a solemn expression, "I came from the Giant King's court." This was a term that all the residents of Moon City were familiar with. Their spirits were instantly lifted as they cast their attention away from the items above the burning fire and cast it at Gehrman Sparrow. Following that, Klein described the situation outside the City of Silver and the situation beyond the Cursed Land. He also shared with them his sightings of city ruins along the way. The residents of Moon City sighed when they heard this. Sometimes they looked forward to it, but sometimes they found it hard to believe. At times, they could empathize with it and be filled with sorrow. Halfway through his sentence, Klein suddenly stopped. He retracted the black long metal skewer, brought it to his mouth, and bit down on a mushroom. Thick meat juices seeped out and, with a slightly scorching feeling, cleansed his mouth. After spending half a year in the forsaken land of the gods, Klein had already overcome his disgust towards mushrooms. After all, Danitz was often tasked by him with things to do. He was unable to meticulously prepare food and sacrifice things to him. During this period, he could only rely on mushrooms for sustenance. He closed his eyes in satisfaction and handed over the long, black skewer. He smiled and said, "You can try some." High Priest Nim was still hesitant when Russ reached out his hand. As he expressed his gratitude, he got a mushroom and put it into his mouth. He ate too quickly, so much so that his mouth was scalded. However, after his expression twisted, it suddenly froze. Following that, his expression slowly relaxed as he gradually revealed a sense of intoxication, pleasure, and yearning. In the end, Russ's tears flowed out unknowingly as he muttered in a deep, choking voice, "This is the best and most superb food I've ever eaten." Even though their taste for food had changed after generations, humans couldn't adapt to food with toxins and madness. They still yearned for sugar and fat. At that moment, all the residents of Moon City could tell that Russ was moved. Chapter 12:18 Clue, Give it a try too. Klein handed the iron-black long skewer to the other residents of Moon City. Their throats bobbed up and down as they couldn't help but swallow another mouthful of saliva. However, they didn't immediately respond. All of them cast their gazes at the high priest, waiting for him to nod. In his animal hide clothes, Nim took out an item. It looked like a magnifying glass with a handle. At a glance, Klein almost imagined that he had seen a monocle. This fright made his heart skip a beat. Thankfully, he managed to control himself in time to confirm the details. Holding the metallic handle, he placed the glass object in front of his right eye and observed Russ for a few seconds through the lens. After a brief silence, he put down the item and nodded at the other Moon City residents. People other than Russ finally reached out their hands and carefully removed a mushroom from the iron-black long skewer and stuffed it into their mouths. The item that was void of nauseous smells and foulness made them instantly become intoxicated. Without caring about the scorching feeling in their oral cavities, they swallowed the mushrooms into their stomachs and instinctively reached out for another one. However, all the mushrooms on the iron-black long skewer had already been distributed. Nim retracted his gaze from the iron-black long skewer and waited for Gehrman Sparrow to continue explaining his experiences and the fool's teachings. Klein looked around and repeated the words he had previously said, "The surrounding mushrooms can be taken at any time, apart from the pure black ones. In addition, they have to be fully cooked before they can be eaten. Otherwise, you will be cursed." The residents of Moon City no longer hesitated. They immediately stood up and chose the mushrooms that they had been longing for. With a glance, Klein added, "When the white mushrooms are cooked, they easily split open and have liquids flow out. You need to prepare some containers or drink them once that happens." Without waiting for Russ and company to respond, he continued the topic that he had previously stopped mid-explanation. He went on until he mentioned how he heard the voices in the grayish-white fog chant Mr. Fool's honorific name. Seeing that High Priest Nim so absorbed by his tales, to the point of being a little moved, Klein deliberated and said, "There are still many ways to make the grayish-white fog react, but they are all related to my lord." This was a reasonable guess. This was because not only was there one hanging person, but there wasn't only one way to enter the world above the gray fog. If Emperor Roselle had brought the mysterious silver plate that he had replicated here, there was a high chance that the invisible barrier would produce an anomaly. Of course, the prerequisite was that the Emperor belonged to one of the three pathways of Seer, Apprentice, or Marauder. Visit website Our List Novel. Calm. Seeing that there were no doubts from the others, Klein said warmly, "According to my observations, there isn't only one Beyonder pathway in Moon City." The grizzled Nim didn't hide it from him and simply replied, "Yes, when we were selected to come to Moon City, the Oracle had intentionally ensured that there was a comprehensive record of Beyonder pathways. Unfortunately, after all these years and the repeated disasters, many of the potion formulas and Beyonder ingredients of the various pathways have been lost." "Which pathway are you from?" Klein asked casually as he looked at the residents of Moon City using monster bones to roast the mushrooms. "I'm a Nightwatcher," Nim said frankly. "Sequence 4 Nightwatcher of the Evernight pathway?" Klein nodded slightly and asked, "Did anything unusual happen near this grayish-white fog?" After pondering for about 10 seconds, Nim with his pockmarked face said, "Yes. Klein's heart stirred as he calmly asked, what kind of abnormality was it? Nim glanced at the mushrooms that emitted fragrant smells, and he deliberated over his words. A small hill suddenly disappeared, leaving only a deep crater in the ground. There were no signs of an explosion in that area, nor was there any soil scattered around. What's going on? That's a little bizarre. As he threw the mushroom's roots into the fire to turn them into fuel for the flames, Klein asked without any change in expression, "Did you investigate further?" "Yes." The high priest of Moon City nodded and said, "An investigation team encountered a demonic wolf there. It wasn't a demonic wolf that has already rotted or mutated, but the kind of demonic wolf from a long time ago." Demonic wolf? Klein didn't expect to hear such information. His pupils changed slightly as he asked, "What did that demonic wolf look like?" Nim unconsciously took a deep breath and said, "It's the same as the demonic wolves described in ancient literature, but it's even bigger. Even though its 8 legs are on the ground, it's still as tall as 2 or 3 people combined. Its fur wasn't pure black. It exuded a dark and deep feeling. Its eyes were very strange. The pupils, black pupils, took up a large part of the eyes. Also, there was a tuft of gray short hair on its head. Isn't that the dark demonic wolf, Kotar? It actually came to the far east of the forsaken land of the gods, and was involved in an anomaly? If the power of the Western continent's disappearance really comes from Sapphira Castle, it would still be quite normal for it to attract the mythical creatures that corresponded to Miracle Invoker." Klein frowned slightly and said, "It didn't attack your investigation team?" Klein had deliberately used it, instead of he, to prevent frightening the residents of Moon City. In his opinion, it was very easy for the dark demonic wolf, Kotar, to wipe out an investigation team. It didn't even need to pay a huge price to turn the city into his marionette kingdom. Yet, this mythical creature had apparently spared Moon City. If not for the spirit body threads that he had seen in advance and that he confirmed their conditions, Klein would have suspected that he was only talking to a few marionettes. "No, it left in a hurry," Nim replied. "This doesn't match the suspicious and cautious nature of the dark demonic wolf. What frightened him so much that he fled in such a hurry? He didn't even have the time to silence the people who saw him. Or rather, there's something special about the people guarding Moon City under the ancient sun god's revelation, and unless it's necessary, the dark demonic wolf wouldn't attack them?" Klein continued without any change in his tone, "Did it leave any tracks?" "No." Nim firmly shook his head. "Other than the hill turning into a deep crater, we didn't discover anything unusual." As his thoughts raced, Klein tried to ask from another angle. "When did this happen?" The more he understood an object from the past, the more he could make contact with it in the fog of history. After some thought, Nim said, 2 years ago, 2 months, and 10 days ago. He immediately explained, "There are too few things worth recording. It left a deep impression on me. 2 years ago, 2 months and 10 days ago. Currently, it's September 8, 1351, and subtracting that time, it would be 28th June 1349. This." Klein's right hand suddenly trembled slightly. His pupils and his expression were normal, but this was a result of using his clown powers to control them. He remembered very clearly that on June 28, 1349, he had transmigrated. It was the day he became Klein Moretti, it was the day he repeated the luck enhancement ritual and entered Sapphira Castle. The abnormality here, the appearance of the dark demonic wolf, and the hasty departure of this mythical creature were all related to me? A huge wave of emotions surged through his heart. For a moment, he couldn't find an explanation and pretended that nothing had happened. He thought for a moment and asked, "Did something similar happen in the past 2,000 to 3,000 years?" "No." Nim gave a clear answer. "What about 208 years ago? Did anything special happen?" Klein asked. "That was the time when Emperor Roselle transmigrated to this world. After hesitating for 2 seconds, Nim said, I can't tell you the answer. I need to go back and read the corresponding records. Thankfully, the information and documents in the past 3 centuries haven't been damaged. At this point, he added, my limited impression tells me that there shouldn't be anything special. If that's the case, then the cause of this anomaly was because I entered the world above the grey fog and bound Sapphira Castle to myself? Klein nodded slightly and didn't ask further. He simply said, tell me where the crater is. By the time the high priest, Nim, gave an answer, the mushrooms that the residents of Moon City had grilled could be eaten. Some of them took a small bite of the white mushrooms and were scalded by the milk inside. They couldn't bear to spit it out. Some chewed repeatedly, reminiscing over the faint sweetness. Some of them couldn't stop eating at all. Nim was taken aback by what he saw, as though he couldn't believe that these people were from Moon City. Every one of them was showing the conflicted looks of having cravings and being satisfied. Their expressions looked twisted, but they were brimming with pure joy. High Priest, try it as well. Russ, whose eyes were very close to each other, handed a mushroom covered in golden spots that emitted a unique and sweet fragrance to Nim. After hesitating for a moment, Nim carefully used the magnifying glass to take a look before taking the mushroom and stuffing it into his mouth. In the next second, his expression changed slightly as he slowly closed his eyes. He had a taste of something similar from some mutated tree roots, but it wasn't as pure or memorable. After an unknown period of time, he looked at the indifferent Gehrman sparrow and said with an abnormally sincere tone, Your Excellency, we would like to listen to Mr. Fool's teachings. I haven't had the time to make it up yet. However, as I'm getting closer and closer to being an angel, the corresponding matters should be prioritized. The anchors need to be prepared in advance. As his thoughts raced, Klein recalled what he had said when he had come up with to reform the believers of Sea God. His expression quickly turned solemn as he raised his right hand and grabbed at the void. He pulled out a cross covered in bronze and sharp spikes. Following that, he pressed his right thumb onto a thorn, letting the blood enter the unshadowed crucifix. The bronze-green surface of the unshadowed crucifix quickly peeled off, revealing a body made of pure sunlight. God said. Klein opened his mouth and said in a low voice as he raised the resplendent cross in his hand a lot higher. Warm and bright light surged out like a tidal wave, instantly filling the surrounding area. The darkness and discomfort accumulated in the bodies of Nim, Russ, and company began to rapidly melt away. It was as if their bodies were being cleansed. They were in a daze when they heard the oracle, who was holding the resplendent cross and covered in holy radiance, solemnly say, God said. First commandment, Thou shalt not sacrifice unto me living human sacrifices. Second commandment, Thou shalt not use my name in vain. Chapter 12-19 Changing the goal/beat. In the fog sea, which hadn't been engulfed by war, the future slowly began to sail towards the Berserk Sea amidst a convoy of ships. Admiral of Stars Katlia hadn't had much to do recently. All she had to do was wait for the Moses ascetic order to respond to her request. As she strolled the deck, she enjoyed the sunlight that shone through the thin mist. With a sweep of her gaze, she saw Frank Lee. This first mate of the future, the second most important person of the Star Pirates, was wearing light blue pants and a white shirt with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned, revealing thick brown chest hair. He was like a humanoid giant bear. He stood at the bow of the boat, looking into the distance. It was unknown what he was thinking, but he looked rather down. Katlia involuntarily slowed down a little as she turned to enter the cabin. Captain. Frank noticed her and looked over with anticipation, as though he was waiting for this Admiral of Stars to answer his questions. Katlia's figure paused as she adjusted the heavy glasses on her nose and asked in a seemingly casual manner, What are you stumped with? Frank thought about how to phrase his question and replied in a serious manner, I'm re-evaluating the inventions and creations I've created over the years. What are your thoughts? Cadlia asked cooperatively. Frank nodded and said in distress, "There are too many matters I need to reflect on. The most important thing is that the things I've created are still missing the most important thing." Cadlia was puzzled, but she didn't wish to ask further. In the end, she still held on to the thought of taking responsibility for all the crew members on the future. She deliberated and said, "What is it?" Frank's expression instantly turned solemn. "They all lack souls. It's a good thing that malt, grapes, and mushrooms don't have souls," Cadlia subconsciously advised before saying, "This isn't something you can dabble in right now. You're only a Sequence 5 druid." Frank's eyes lit up when he heard that as he blurted out, "I've got it." Cadlia frowned indiscernibly. "What, did you get?" Frank was no longer depressed. "I understand the problem. That is, the creations I want have exceeded the limits of a druid's abilities. Therefore, Captain, I'm not going to be a druid anymore. I want to become a classical alchemist." This was Sequence 4 of the Planter Pathway, the starting point of a demigod. Cadlia's expression froze for a few seconds before she took on the posture of a captain and a demigod. She nodded gently and said, "Having a goal is a good thing, but you have to understand how difficult it is." Underlying those words, she wanted him to not hold any hopes and not to take this goal seriously. Frank Lee nodded heavily after receiving her encouragement. "I will do my best." To prevent Frank Lee from acting rashly, Cadlia decided to take the progress of the matter into her own hands. "I will help you too." When the time came, even if she had any progress, she could inform Frank Lee that she had tried to no avail. Frank was very happy as he thanked his captain from the bottom of his heart before continuing, "I'll also write to Gehrman Sparrow and ask him for help. He's my good friend." What Frank didn't know was that the letters he had written for the past half a year had gone through a rather convoluted process. The letter went to the messenger before being delivered to Furs. Furs would then transfer it to Gehrman Sparrow or request Mr. Fool's help at the tarot gathering. Cadlia nudged her thick glasses again and, without another word, turned and entered the cabin. She returned to the captain's cabin. Before she could think about what had just happened, she saw a letter on the desk with the brass sextant. Cadlia was delighted. Ignoring the use of her beyonder powers, she quickly walked over, picked up the letter, and opened it. It was from Bernadette. After exchanging a few simple pleasantries, she wrote, "If you are free anytime, you can come to Wuxia incognito." Wuxia was a rather hidden island in the Fog Sea. It hid Queen Mystic's palace, also known as Emerald City. Cadlia repeated the sentence a few times before the corners of her mouth curled up involuntarily. Backlund, Westborough, within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White once again met the middle-aged, gentlemanly sanguine Baron, Cosme Odora. What did Lord Nib say? Emlyn controlled his emotions, trying his best to appear less eager. Cosme looked at Emlyn's bright red eyes and said, "He only wanted me to tell you that the entire sanguine race doesn't have any excess Earl Beyonder characteristics. You can only wait for the present Earls to die of old age or accidents, leaving behind their inheritance." Compared to humans, the sanguine had a long lifespan. Even without a noble title, ordinary ones could live about 300 years old. Under such circumstances, they could slowly accumulate and occupy every level, preventing any excess in Beyonder characteristics. Therefore, it wasn't easy for ordinary ones to advance to Baron or become a Viscount. They either waited for the existing nobles to die, or they would obtain it from external sources. Otherwise, they would have to make sufficient contributions and receive the precious inheritance. Compared to the first two sequences, it was even more difficult for a Viscount to become an Earl. This was because being a sanguine Earl meant being a demigod, and he could easily live for more than 1,000 years. Those Viscount's descendants had to pass generations before they could wait for a chance of an Earl's passing. And it was precisely because of this that, as long as there was a vacancy in the Earl position, it would immediately be distributed and not in stock. For Baron and Viscount characteristics, They existed in the Sanguine's treasury in the form of beyonder ingredients and sealed artifacts, but the numbers were few and far between. Every bestowment had to be strictly administered. There really weren't any spare Earl characteristics. This answer was within Emlyn's expectations. He looked at Baron Cosme and nodded slightly. In other words, as long as any count passes away, it will be my turn? No. Cosme shook his head. Although you have contributed plenty, you haven't reached first place on the waiting list yet. What's my ranking? Emlyn first frowned before relaxing his brows to prevent his eagerness from showing. Cosme coughed and cleared his throat. 12th, this might not even happen when the apocalypse arrives. Since the ancestor has given me the important task of saving the race, why didn't she arrange all these matters? My Scarlet Scholar potion has been digested for months. Could it be that another test? Emlyn thought to himself silently for a few seconds before asking thoughtfully, if I obtain an Earl's characteristic from external sources, will the race help me prepare the ritual? Cosme exhaled and said, of course. Emlyn didn't stay any longer. He left Odora's villa and took a carriage back to his residence. Ever since Fainapotter declared war on Lone, he had never been to the Harvest Church. He had only heard from the Star that the door had been smashed and many things had been stolen. It had become a place for the homeless. As for Father Yutravsky, he spent half a month in a cell behind Cheney's gate. The rest of the month was spent in a room on the upper level of St. Samuel Cathedral, with the Archbishop of Backlund next door. This arrangement was repeated over and over again. This was because they were worried that if Father Yutravsky were to stay behind Cheney's gate for an extended period of time, he would suffer irreversible damage. Under such a tense situation, the Church of Evernight wished to leave some buffer time so that they could use this opportunity to express their goodwill and begin negotiations. Although Emlyn wasn't a believer in Evernight, and he even somewhat detested the cathedral, he went to St. Samuel Cathedral twice a month to visit Father Yutravsky. Where can I obtain an Earl's characteristic? Emlyn, who felt that he had fallen behind and might not be able to bear the responsibility of saving his race, looked at the bleak streets while seriously considering every possibility. He quickly had some ideas. Ma'am Hermit had mentioned before that the Aurora Order Saint, Saint Tenebris, had grazed a shaman king. This corresponded to the Earl characteristic. If I could hunt this demigod of the shepherd pathway like the Saint of Secrets, the problem would be resolved. However, after the previous lesson, Saint Tenebris probably wouldn't fall into a trap so easily. There's also a possibility of directly attracting a king of angels. This was something everyone had discussed in the Tarot Club. The conclusion was that they had been attacking the Aurora Order for the past year, so it was best not to provoke them further. Apart from Saint Tenebris having a sequence 4 Shaman King characteristic, Emlyn White could only think of one other option, the Rose School of Thought. Be it the Life School of Thought's artificial vampires or the primordial moon worshippers that originally existed in the southern continent, they were now part of the Rose School of Thought. Of course, there were definitely some people who sought freedom. They hadn't joined any organizations yet, but either they were not at high sequences, or they didn't have enough information to leak out. Upon thinking of the Rose School of Thought, Emlyn instantly recalled a person. Marek. Marek represented the Temperance faction of the Rose School of Thought. It was a faction that resisted the Mother Tree of Desire. They also appear like they want to obtain something from the Rose School of Thought. Perhaps I can cooperate with them. Emlyn nodded slightly. A number of residents in Moon City anxiously gathered at the entrance, casting their sights east from time to time. They were the relatives of the people who had previously been led by the High Priest. They were also the representatives of most people in Moon City. Finally, as the flames flickered, High Priest Nim brought Russ and company closer to Moon City. A man went forward and looked at his sister. He noticed that there were still traces of tears on her face. This Moon City resident, who wasn't deformed, could sense her brother's gaze. She couldn't help but open her mouth, tears streaming down her face. God is here to save us, she started to cry. It was such a sad and free cry as she let out her emotions. Chapter 12:28 Curtain God is here to save us. The words spoken in a sob-filled voice echoed at the entrance of Moon City, causing the residents who were waiting to fall into a trance. At the edges of the grayish-white fog, a fire quietly burned. After eating another batch of mushrooms, Klein dispelled the iron-black skewer in his hand and looked up at the crater described by Moon City's high priest, Nim. He then reached out with his right hand and gently pulled, dragging himself out from 15 minutes ago. After exchanging looks, Klein's true form rapidly vanished and entered the fog of history. He ran all the way to a time before the first epoch, and he sat in the old stacked cities. His historical projection stood up and snapped his fingers repeatedly, flashing through the crimson flames as he headed for his destination. When the crater that was once a hill was almost right in front of him, he stopped. He cautiously extended his right palm and pulled Kona's Kilgore out of the void. The burly Earl of the Fallen's facial muscles twitched as he quickly transformed into another Gehrman sparrow. He took out a lantern from the fog of history with one hand and rubbed his temples with the other as he muttered softly, "Why does a marionette have to change its appearance? There's no one else here. I can't develop OCD." A few seconds later, the marionette's projection carried a lantern that emitted faint yellow light as it walked towards the crater not far away. As the light flickered, Klein saw his target location and realized that it wasn't too deep. The difference between the bottom and the ground wasn't more than 2 meters. Of course, compared to the original hill, this change was indeed huge. Inside the crater, the soil was smooth, and there were a few rocks in it. There were many twisted, mutated plants around it whose species were difficult to distinguish. It looked no different from other places. After observing for a while, Klein, who had stealthily activated spirit-body threads and spirit-body threads vision, slowly entered the crater, planning on following his pre-planned route and reassessing everything worth paying attention to. As he walked, he frowned slightly and let out an exclamation. He realized that his thoughts had turned sluggish, but it didn't affect his thinking. It was as if he had slept too much and had just woken up, having a heavy head with insufficiently active thoughts. This was a situation that a person would occasionally experience. Beyonders of the other pathways might not be able to detect it, but as a demigod of the seer pathway, Klein could clearly sense something amiss. If it were any deeper, it would be close to the effect when a marionettist controls spirit-body threads. The influence left behind by dark demonic wolf Kotar? That's not right. If he didn't mean to leave it behind, it means that he showed his complete mythical creature form back then. That would have resulted in Moon City's investigation team in breaking down and losing control. If he had intentionally left it behind, what would be the purpose? Telling others that he was here? Klein circled the area in puzzlement, but he didn't discover any anomalies. After some thought, he let his main body that was hiding in the historical void in a time before the first epoch take 4 steps counterclockwise as he recited the incantation and went above the gray fog. He wanted to do a divination. With the exact time and location, Nim's description, and a real-world survey of the area, as well as lighting up some of the historical fragments, he believed that the prerequisite for making a divination had basically been met. This didn't mean it was enough, but that he could barely give it a try. Besides, if the hill turning into a crater incident had something to do with Sapphira Castle and him, then the chances of a successful divination would greatly increase. The revelation would be very clear and not be interfered with. Without any further thought, he sat on the fool's high-back chair. He conjured a dark red fountain pen and yellow parchment and wrote, June 28th of June 1349 of the 5th epoch. The anomaly that happened here. He put down the fountain pen and grabbed with his left hand. He pulled out a handful of crater soil from the fog of history to use it as a medium for divination. With one hand holding the soil and the other holding the parchment, He leaned back in his chair and recited the divination statement 7 times. Then, with the help of cogitation, he fell asleep. In the hazy dream world, Klein saw the grayish-white solidified fog. He saw the hill that was tens of meters high, and the twisted vegetation around it. A few seconds later, the fog began to churn and rapidly vomited a black shadow. The black shadow was like a huge velvet curtain, madly absorbing all the light around it. Its translucency increased as it completely enveloped the hill. Following that, the hill vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a crater. The strange plants at the edge of the crater were also suddenly covered and had black illusory spirit body threads that extended towards different parts of the black curtain. The curtain became more and more transparent and illusory until it reached a point where one couldn't see it with the naked eye. If not for the fact that he had spirit body threads vision to observe the reality of the scene, Klein wouldn't have been able to discover that the curtain had covered the crater's surface. The scene flashed, and the dreamscape twisted to reveal a new scene. Moon City's 5-man patrol team approached and discovered that a crater had replaced the hill that had vanished. They stopped in their tracks and left the area without hesitation. They didn't rashly investigate. After an unknown period of time, a gigantic figure suddenly appeared in another direction. It was a demonic wolf covered in dark fur with 8 legs. It was about 4 to 5 meters tall. The demonic wolf had a tuft of short, grayish-white fur on its forehead. Its pure black pupils covered at least 3/4 of the space of its eyes. It was none other than the dark demonic wolf, Kotar. The dark demonic wolf raised his head and opened his mouth, as though he was screaming, but nothing happened. In the next second, a figure appeared in front of him. It was another him. The dark demonic wolf's historical projection did a simple step with his 8 legs and he instantly arrived beside the crater. After he surveyed the area, he carefully lowered his head and picked up the completely transparent curtain that had made the entire hill disappear. The curtain suddenly came alive as it rapidly contracted and spun. It wrapped around the black demonic wolf as if it was adding half a black translucent piece of clothing to him. The dark demonic wolf trembled slightly, as if it had become a clothed marionette in 2 to 3 seconds. However, this was only a historical void projection. The next breath didn't happen as the main body stopped maintaining the projection. The curtain lost its support as it instantly collapsed and lay spread out on the ground. Dark demonic wolf Kotar didn't give up. He occasionally transformed the monsters around him into marionettes or summoned historical projections, allowing them to go forward again and again, experiencing all kinds of failures. However, in the end, his newest batch of marionettes still managed to pick up and control the curtain. The entire process was silent, as though it was a mime act. Following that, the gigantic demonic wolf made the marionettes bring the curtain to him. At that moment, the grayish-white fog around him churned again, forming a vortex that was comparable to a hill. The vortex emitted an invisible suction force, causing the strange curtain and dark demonic wolf Kotar to be thrown towards it at the same time. Such a scene caused a substantial ripple to appear in the dreamscape. Countless points of light appeared, making it difficult for him to see the specific details. When everything returned to normal, dark demonic wolf Kotar draped the transparent curtain around him and rapidly flew away from the solidified fog. And at that moment, the Moon City investigation team arrived and saw the ancient subsidiary god leave. Kotar glanced at them, but he didn't stop, vanishing into the darkness. At this point, the scene shattered and the dream ended. Klein woke up. He sat up straight and tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his fingers as he silently muttered, "It's not that there weren't any anomalies before I arrived. More likely it is that the guards from Moon City didn't discover it. After all, the fog extends outwards to an unknown limit. What's that curtain that was spat out by the grayish-white fog? It can cover a hill when it's large, turning it into a crater, as though by magic. When it's small, it can be used as clothes by the demonic wolf, turning him into a marionette. It's a little like a high-sequence item of the seer pathway. It was spat out because I entered the world above the grey fog and completed the binding with Sapphira Castle. It seems to be able to turn the surrounding vegetation into its marionettes. This gives me a familiar feeling. Yes, there was something wrong with the food laid out in the rooms of the foggy town back then. Spirit body threads were growing out of them, reaching out towards the core of the cathedral. Once they've been eaten, one will instantly evaporate and vanish. Yes, they end up hanging in the cathedral and becoming a marionette. In other words, once one reaches the level of miracle invoker or attendant of mysteries, one can make plants or objects with spirituality grow spirit body threads, so as to turn them into marionettes? Is that, curtain, the beyonder characteristics of a miracle invoker or attendant of mysteries? Judging from the dark demonic wolf's performance, it might very well be the latter. This is the reason why one attendant of mysteries characteristic has been missing for a long period of time. There were only clues, but no one could find it. Before Sapphira Castle had an owner, the grayish-white fog unconsciously attracted the high-sequence characteristics of the three pathways across space and accommodated them. What is it trying to do? That suction force is really very strong. It frightened even dark demonic wolf Kotar. He didn't even stop, only having thoughts of escaping. What was he suspecting? What was he afraid of? After some analysis, there was a look of excitement on his face. If he could successfully hunt down an angel like the dark demonic wolf, it would be an unparalleled harvest. Of course, the dark demonic wolf, who now had the curtain, was much harder to deal with than before. This matter had greatly reduced his confidence in succeeding. As his thoughts raced, he suddenly recalled something. From the timing of these sequence of events, the dark demonic wolf clearly had the curtain by the time he arrived in the northern city ruins, noise. He turned the entire city into marionettes and created a marionette city. It wasn't to settle down, nor was it to accumulate helpers. It was to prepare the ritual for attendant of mysteries. Chapter 12:21 Leaving a message. If the dark demonic wolf really is preparing the attendant of mysteries ritual, then his whereabouts won't lack traces. Klein nodded slowly. He already had some vague ideas on his mind, but he was still unable to truly sort them out. He instinctively wanted to divine the location of the curtain by using the soil that had been tainted by the curtain, so as to lock onto the location of the dark demonic wolf. However, considering how the latter was an angel, such a method would most likely alarm him, alerting him and causing him to take precautionary measures. Therefore, Klein rationally gave up on this idea and returned to the real world. He thought hard about formulating a plan. The next day, when there was a high frequency of lightning, another batch of Moon City residents came to Gehrman Sparrow's bonfire under the leadership of a priest named Duke. They listened to his teachings, enjoyed the mushrooms, and waited to be cleansed. After the residents of Moon City experienced the cleansing, with tears streaming down their faces, Klein looked around and casually asked, "The sun god told you to guard this land and to take note of anyone walking out of the fog?" Duke, who had been cured of his bloated ailment, knew that the high priest had mentioned this matter to the oracle before him. He answered rather calmly, "Yes." Klein nodded slightly and continued on the topic. "If you really discover someone walking out of the fog, what will you need to do?" Duke said without hesitation, "Recite the honorific name of the great sun god immediately and report this matter to him." As he spoke, his tone became very depressed. In the end, he was unable to formulate his words. This was because the sun god, the creator, hadn't given any response for more than 2,000 years. Even though Moon City had held the most complete rituals and repeatedly chanted the honorific name, there had been no response. Anything else? Klein pressed as he sharply noticed something. This was a revelation from his spiritual intuition, and also a result of a certain degree of deduction. It was obvious that the ancient sun god and the city of silver creator would have considered this problem. One possibility was that the person who walked out of the grayish-white fog was extremely careful. He was very cautious and didn't enjoy being watched or monitored. After discovering the patrol team in Moon City, he would be inclined to use his Beyonder powers to affect their minds, making them forget that they had seen him or reciting the honorific name. In this situation, the ancient sun god should have made certain arrangements. Of course, this wasn't absolute. If Amon's father could accurately predict that the person walking out of the grayish-white fog was a rookie, then there was no need to say too much in the revelation. However, considering how the ancient sun god, the city of silver's creator, had made an error in predicting where he would come out from the grayish-white fog, Klein was doubtful of the aforementioned possibility. Duke thought for a moment and hesitated before saying, to welcome that person and tell him a single word. Klein's spirits were immediately lifted as he asked without batting an eyelid, what word? Duke's lips quivered as though he was mimicking the pronunciation. Then, he said in a strange tone, Chernobyl. Klein's mind froze for a second before he let out a silent sigh. The Lone Kingdom, Eastchester County, in a forest. The nearby villagers gathered here and plucked strange mushrooms that were covered in roots, deadwood, and shrubs. According to the kingdom's laws, everything that grew in this forest belonged to its owner, Miss Audrey Hall. However, with the war escalating, the demand of food, and the high taxes, these factors made it so that the farmers could no longer care about breaking the law. It was something that needed to be considered only if they survived. Furthermore, with more people participating, they naturally became emboldened. They formed small teams and very efficiently plucked the mushrooms that were covered in golden stars or marbling streaks. They were divided into two parts, and a small portion was reserved for consumption. Most of them were prepared to be sold to grain merchants waiting outside the forest to exchange for gold pounds, for salt, fabric and other essential items. These farmers didn't go overboard. Other than the mushrooms, they only took a portion of the fruits on the trees. They left behind what was sufficient for the rangers of the forest to submit to their masters. In just 2 or 3 hours, the farmers sold large amounts of mushrooms and fruits. With the gold pounds in hand, they returned to their hamlets with beaming smiles. To them, everything that happened today was what they wanted to do, and they had also achieved their predetermined goals. The grain merchant who had a full beard was equally happy because this was an unexpected harvest. With the present situation, he could earn a lot of money. He led the workers with him to move large amounts of mushrooms and fruits to the processing point outside the city. After making the necessary arrangements, he placed them all into the warehouse. As a meticulous businessman, he checked the warehouse again after sending the workers away. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he closed the door and locked it. At this moment, he saw a thick wad of cash on the ground. They were all 10-pound notes. When did I drop so much money? The grain merchant bent down in joy and picked up the stack of notes. As he counted, he suddenly recalled the origins of the money. They were the profits from selling the mushroom powder, dried mushroom, and dried fruits. How generous! The bearded businessman sighed in satisfaction and turned to leave the warehouse. Inside the warehouse, Audrey, who was wearing a light blue dress, removed her psychological invisibility and took out a black pocket. This was the traveler's bag that she had rented from Zio. Following that, the blonde, simple-looking Audrey easily threw bags of food into the black pocket. After doing all of this, she took out a hard-covered bronze notebook and flipped to a page with teleportation. This was from Furs, Lamino's travels. And what had conspired here was secretly manipulated by Audrey. She first gave the fast-growing mushrooms provided by Ma'am Hermit to the animals in the woods. With their help, she planted them at suitable spots. Following that, she influenced the farmers in the surrounding hamlets, strengthening their inner desires, and making them overcome their fear of the law. And that grain merchant happened to pass by and discovered this. This sort of manipulation of a person's heart was intoxicating, like a master of all beings. However, Audrey didn't smile at all. Instead, she sighed softly. It's still not enough. I'm still lacking plenty. Lots. The mushroom she had obtained wasn't the type that Little Sun said could absorb the flesh and blood of monsters to flourish. They needed sufficient nutrients to rapidly grow. Therefore, there was no way to plant a second batch of mushrooms in this forest in a short time, otherwise, it was very likely to become a desert. Staring at the empty cloth bags that had been emptied out, Audrey's green eyes flashed. She couldn't help but think, a large amount of food is concentrated at the church, the royal family, the military, the government, the nobles, and the businessmen. There are also some from Faisak, Intis, and Fainapotter, but who knows how many times I'll have to move them with only traveler's bag. Manipulating the nobles, businessmen, and military personnel is very dangerous. I might be discovered if I'm not careful. If the situation hadn't deteriorated to such a state, I might have never known that some people would have such a side to them. When the environment and circumstances are different, the masks that everyone wears are different. I have to take note of this in the future. As her thoughts raced, Audrey, who lacked experience in handling such matters, decided to seek Mr. World's advice to see if he had any suggestions. As the World Gehrman Sparrow had been walking alone in the uninhabited forsaken land of the gods, he was surrounded by darkness and despair. Audrey suggested that he should seek her out regularly for psychological counseling. This might not necessarily imply any treatment. A casual chat could effectively relieve the pressure, loneliness, and misery. Gehrman Sparrow followed his doctor's advice, and from their chats, Audrey knew that, apart from asking her for medical advice, this powerful adventurer would also gossip with Mr. Star above the grey fog from time to time, maintaining a rather good state of mind. With this decision, Audrey immediately activated her traveling ability and returned to Backlund. But on second thought, she felt a little depressed. This was because she knew that, even if she gathered a large amount of food, she could only quell the residents of Backlund for some time. If the war didn't end, the situation would still worsen. War. Audrey closed her eyes. She had no idea how she could stop it. She had heard from Mam Hermit that the nature of this war was very likely to be a battle of gods. And the prelude to a battle of gods had always been very consistent. It was to spend a certain amount of time and strength to shake the anchors of their opponents. After some thought, Audrey pursed her lips and decided to start with what she could do. As the notebook emitted a misty glow, her figure quickly turned transparent and disappeared. Beside the quietly burning bonfire, Klein, who had just sent away the guests from Moon City, couldn't help but recall the words blasphemer Amon had said before. He said that there were many clues and things in the past that he wanted to explore that were buried deep within Chernobyl. The ancient sun god had also specially emphasized Chernobyl. Amidst his thoughts, he suddenly had the urge to explore Chernobyl. This wasn't considered rash. It was something he had always wanted to do. However, he didn't dare to do so because of Amon. I've been heading east for more than half a year. Who would have thought that I would suddenly arrive at Chernobyl? Amon has obtained the last worm of time beyond her characteristic and is preparing the ritual. It's impossible for his true body to still be in Chernobyl. Yes, he is a very patient king of angels. Perhaps, his avatars have been waiting in Chernobyl all this time. After analyzing the present situation, Klein decided to let a projection from the historical void make an attempt. In any case, he would never head there directly with his actual body. After making up his mind, Klein went above the grey fog to do a divination. Then, he returned to the real world and reached out his hand to grab into the void, dragging his past self from 5 minutes ago. As his main body disappeared, his projection gained consciousness. Following that, he grabbed a few times and took out the black staff embedded with many gems. The staff of the stars. He wanted to use the power of the Staff of the Stars to directly teleport to Chernobyl. Chapter 12:22 Research Facility /B. When he held the Staff of the Stars, Klein pulled out a gold coin out of thin air with his other hand and flicked it. As the gold coin tumbled, a revelation from his divination appeared in his mind. It was an extremely deep ravine. At the bottom of it was a thick and vast building that was covered in layers of grayish-white. Every detail was restored to the Chernobyl that Klein had seen at the beginning. However, it didn't originate from the spirit world, but from his own subconscious. Using the technique of dream divination, he reproduced the images he had seen in his mind. And the moment this scene was completed, the gems embedded in the Staff of the Stars emitted a faint glow. It instantly vanished along with Klein's historical void projection and appeared above the grayish-white building. In just a second, Klein returned from the easternmost front of the forsaken land of the gods to Chernobyl. This was one of the main powers of the Staff of the Stars. If the corresponding scene that surfaced in the mind of the wielder still existed in the real world, then the Staff of the Stars could allow them to cross all obstacles and distances, directly descending to their desired destination. Of course, the prerequisite was that the outlined scene had to be absolutely correct and not visually be any different from the original. The reason why he chose the deep ravine where Chernobyl was located, and not the grayish-yellow fog, was because he knew that the giant king's youngest son, the god of glory, Bladel, had perished after being freed from the curse. The area would definitely experience major changes, and the only thing that wasn't affected was the mysterious Chernobyl, which was valued by the ancient sun god and Amon. This also didn't mean that the deep ravine and grayish-white building wouldn't have any visible changes. In fact, Klein had already prepared himself for the failure of his teleportation attempt. After all, the person performing it was fake, and the item in his hand was also fake. It wouldn't be a pity if he lost it. In midair, Klein, with the Staff of the Stars in his hand, didn't even have time to examine his surroundings when his entire body suddenly sank and plummeted downwards. He didn't wear creeping hunger, nor did he transform into an avian creature. He was currently unable to fly. Therefore, even though the demigods of the seer pathway were bizarre and terrifying, they actually had a human side to them. As his thoughts raced, a beyonder power appeared in his mind. Following that, the Staff of the Stars lit up with different colors, causing the surroundings to be filled with violent winds. The wind swirled around him, causing his black trench coat to flap and his body to slowly descend. During this process, Klein's right hand trembled, allowing the Staff of the Stars' historical projection to return to its normal location, doing so to prevent accidents from happening to him because of him imagining certain scenes. Right on the heels of that, his left hand pressed down on the half-top hat on his head. Just as the lightning in the sky was about to pass, he pulled out a lantern from the void. Under the dim yellow light of the lantern, Klein stepped firmly onto the ground beneath the deep ravine with his buckle-less leather shoes. The endless darkness around him seemed to contain monsters. He was standing in front of the grayish-white Chernobyl, which was formed in layers. Under the synchronized effects of the lightning and the lantern in his hand, Klein quickly discovered a situation. There was no door to this thick and vast grayish-white building. Every place is sealed. I remember that the ancient sun god had opened an illusory crack on the grayish-white wall before coming out. As if in thought, Klein found the spot in his memories and began chanting the honorific name of the fool. At the easternmost front of the forsaken land of the gods, by the solidified fog near Moon City, Klein, who was hiding in the historical void, immediately entered Sapphira Castle. With the help of the prayer light, he used his true vision to scan the situation at Chernobyl. In the deep ravine and desolate plains with remnant grayish-yellow fog, there wasn't a single Amon present. As for Chernobyl itself, even with the true vision provided by Sapphira Castle, it wasn't enough for him to clearly see what was going on inside. Underneath the layers and layers of grayish-white, there appeared to be absolute nothingness, a space without any color. Indeed, it's not simple. As expected of the place where the ancient sun god, the city of silver's creator, walked out of. After sighing inwardly, he quickly left Sapphira Castle and returned to the historical fragment from before the first epoch. Klein, who was standing outside of Chernobyl, regained consciousness. He reached out his hand and took out Lamino's travels. He quickly flipped to one of the pages and prepared to use the door-opening power of an apprentice. Such an action was actually a little rash for him, but considering that this was just a projection in the historical void, he felt that there weren't any problems with that. The Beyonders of the seer pathway are indeed both cautious and reckless at the same time. They're careful when making preparations, but reckless after making preparations. They show traits of caution and recklessness at the same time. As he lampooned himself, Klein silently passed through the obstacle and entered Chernobyl's interior. After door opening repeatedly, he finally left the grayish-white buildings. He saw an ajar heavy metal door in front of him. The metal door wasn't very tall, only about 2.5 meters tall. It was obviously prepared for humans. In front of it, there were 2 pitch-black marks and 2 machine guns that were more sci-fi than any weapon belonging to this era. These 2 machine guns looked a little similar to the ones he had seen when he was flipping through some magazines in his previous life. However, he wasn't a fan of such things, so he couldn't be sure. Klein didn't pick them up or attempt to study them. His spiritual intuition told him that the 2 firearm-like weapons had completely corroded. Any contact with them would instantly cause them to disintegrate. After taking a few looks, he dispelled Lamino's travels. With the lantern in hand, he passed through 2 pitch-black marks and arrived behind the metal door. There was a wide aisle here, and on both sides were rooms of different sizes. The tables and chairs inside were toppled, some were fine and others were broken in half. The walls were covered with black streaks. It looks like a research facility. Klein set off from the remnants and overall layout, coming to a preliminary conclusion. There was no need for him to deliberately search for anything. He quickly found a room with a destroyed machine. There were a few pieces of paper on the table that had a yellow tint to it. It seemed like someone had casually placed it there after collecting it. The ancient sun god or Amon. After hesitating for 2 seconds, he finally stepped into the room. The dim yellow light dispersed the darkness inside as he picked up the few pieces of paper and quickly scanned them. 10 seconds later, Klein put down the piece of paper and the corner of his mouth twitched. He didn't recognize any of the words on those pages. In my previous life, I only barely passed English, let alone other languages. Klein suddenly felt the feelings of the other Beyonders in this world when they read Roselle's diary. He slowly exhaled as he extended his hand into the void and took out an item. This was a translating device that Zhou Mingrue had bought before going on a trip overseas which he had saved up for. When the luck enhancement ritual was held, it was inside a computer bag by his side. To him, the greatest advantage of this translating device was that it could do offline translations, as long as it didn't exceed the internally stored database. After fiddling with it, he finally understood what the few pages wrote: research of the appearance of oil in a dried-up oil field. Why would they need to build a research facility in such an unimaginable place for such matters? God, what did they discover deep in the oil field? This is some amazing material. What exactly happened? The doctor turned into a puddle of black oil in front of me. More and more people have turned into oil. This research facility has been sealed from the outside. No one can leave. No one can leave. Mad, they've all gone mad. We're still normal, but our food is almost running out. I seem to be hearing things. There seems to be sounds coming from underground. It's summoning me. He is summoning me. These lines of simple words sent a chill down Klein's spine. He felt as though he was walking towards madness and death. At the same time, a thought naturally came to his mind: the corruption that stems from underground. The cause of all this was the unnecessary experiments involved after the discovery of some strange material in a dried-up oil field? Then, the world was destroyed? But if it was a disaster caused by such a coincidence, then there's no reason for me, Emperor Roselle, and the others to obtain items to help us transmigrate ahead of time. Perhaps, there are chances amidst inevitability, and in chance, there is inevitability? The underground corruption has always been influencing the human world in an unobvious manner. It can intermittently bring about certain mysterious events. Only when the research facility probed deeper was he fully awakened. Klein subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. With the lantern in hand, he left the room and headed towards the depths of the research facility. He also paid close attention to anything that was worth paying attention to. After walking for nearly a minute, his vision suddenly darkened. More than half of the dim yellow light's radiance was consumed by the area ahead. When he took a closer look, he realized that there was a cliff 2 steps away from him. That portion of the research facility had collapsed into the ground. It was dark and empty, with no end to it. Faintly, he seemed to hear a silent cry. It sounded in his mind from deep underground. This feeling was something Klein had experienced before, from behind the bronze door in the Hall of Truth. He frowned slightly and took a few steps back, prepared to dispel the historical void projection at any moment. At this moment, a palm that was so dry that it only had skin and bones stuck out from the darkness, grabbing onto the edge of the cliff. Then, a figure leaped out and landed in front of him. He was wearing a pointed hat and a classic black robe. He had a monocle on his right eye. It was none other than Angel of Time, Amon. However, this Amon's condition was very abnormal. It was like a skeleton covered in a skin membrane. Klein subconsciously took a few steps back and saw the flesh and blood of the man before him rapidly fill up. He adjusted his monocle, said with a smile, "Ah, a visitor. I wasn't expecting that. And you are?" Chapter 12:23 That level Who am I? Just as Klein was about to remove the historical void projection, he was taken aback by Amon's question. He controlled himself and didn't frown. Instead of answering, he asked, "You aren't Amon's true body?" Standing at the edge of the cliff, Amon took a step forward and smiled. "Of course not. You seem to know my true body or my other avatars?" Although the Amon in front of him didn't take any action, the step he took still gave Klein an indescribable pressure. It wasn't easy for him to keep still without retreating, which would betray his cowardice. He grunted and replied in a low voice, "That's why I'm curious as to why you don't know me." "Are you very famous?" said the Amon who had crawled out of the darkness. He then raised his hand and adjusted his crystal monocle on his right eye. This action lasted for a few seconds before it came to an end. As though in thought, Amon muttered, "There are no other me's nearby." Are there really none, or has the connection been completely severed? What kind of accident caused this Amon to be independent? No way, I can't believe this fellow's acts. He is a top-notch swindler. Klein's heart stirred at first before he suppressed his corresponding thoughts and asked, "Why did you crawl out from underground?" Amon's expression returned to normal as he chuckled. "Guess. Be it his actual body or his avatar's, the fact that he has a terrible personality doesn't change." Klein thought to himself and tried to probe with an answer, "You are exploring the secret that lays underground." Amon nodded slightly and said, "Isn't that obvious?" He then half-turned his body and pointed at the darkness beyond the cliff that the light failed to light up. "My father crawled out of here just like I did." "Ah, right. It has a name. You should have heard of it, Chaos Sea." Chaos Sea? The Chaos Sea, one of the 9 spherotes. It is indeed hidden deep underground. Is the corruption behind the bronze door really brought about by it? Previously, I was made aware of this mysticism knowledge through my casual chats with Amon. The ancient sun god was originally a member of this research facility. Then, he fell into the deep depths of the Chaos Sea, only to awaken in the second epoch and crawl out? As he was only an ordinary person back then, based on the law that proximity to the underground increases in danger with higher sequences, he wasn't affected too much? Klein's mind raced as he recalled many matters and came up with various guesses. 3 seconds later, he said in response, "So you took the risk and jumped into search for the truth of the buried history and the world?" "Something like that." Amon Man pinched the edge of his monocle and said in a self-deprecating tone, "But I didn't do it willingly." Klein used a terse exclamation to express his doubts. Amon smiled and said, "Every single one of me knows that it's very dangerous deep underground. We don't want to go down alone. We have tried many detours, including creating a marionette to replace us. However, we failed to succeed and failed to obtain any feedback. In the end, under the True Body's watch, we held a fair vote. Unfortunately, I was chosen. It's a miracle that Amon hasn't completely gone mad yet. As expected of the god of mischief. Internal decisions have to be done in such a way." Klein resisted the urge to lampoon. "And then, you jumped down yourself? What else?" "Let them throw me down," Amon said as he spread his hands. Having said that, he seemed to finally understand something as he muttered to himself, "The Chaos Sea made me sever ties with my main body and the surrounding avatars? Am I independent?" Independent. Previously, in front of the bronze door of the Hall of Truth, I felt that every cell and every worm of spirit were giving birth to a new consciousness, generating a different form of self. It's very normal for there to be similar changes in Amon's avatar after directly entering the Chaos Sea. An independent Amon avatar should be able to effectively trick Amon's true body. "No, I can't trust him." Klein validated Amon's words using his own experience, but he quickly reminded himself not to trust the god of deceit. He smiled and said, "I suspect you're bluffing." Amon held up the crystal monocle and sized up Klein for a few seconds. "It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. Even if I want to find a partner, it wouldn't be someone as weak as you. In the era of the 8 kings of angels, were you very close to Red Angel Medici?" Having made up his mind not to trust the independence of the Amon in front of him, Klein tried asking, "What did you discover in the Chaos Sea?" "Plenty of things." "Guess what they are," Amon said with a smile. "You didn't discover anything," Klein said deliberately. Amon shook his head. "The other Thames probably think so too. Besides, I haven't been out for a very long time, and I didn't respond. It's logical to believe that I had already been corroded and was digested by Chaos Sea." Without waiting for Klein's response, Amon continued, "Chaos Sea is very large. It almost fills the core, and goes to a further layer. It's also the only Sapphira that merges the real and the illusory and has an entrance in the real world. The others are either completely illusory and hidden somewhere unknown, or they're definitely real while existing in the real world. I found something very interesting inside. The first blasphemy slate was likely born there, but it was later attracted by some power and left the ground before it was complete. My father might have browsed through that blasphemy slate in the beginning, which is why his condensed into the second blasphemy slate when he perished. This is the origins of the 2 blasphemy slates. It's no wonder the ancient sun god was so powerful in the late stages of the second epoch." Klein vaguely understood something and subconsciously asked, "What's so different about the 2 blasphemy slates?" Amon adjusted the crystal monocle and said, "The second blasphemy slate changed some of the sequence names and added content. Those contents contain secrets about transcending sequences." Transcending sequences? Klein's pupils widened slightly. He felt that his long-term guess had been confirmed. Become the creator? Amon smiled and said, "More or less, but this description isn't accurate enough. I like to refer to that level as above the sequences. There are also a number of true deities who name it in other ways. Some call it Great Old Ones, others refer to it as outer deities or cosmos. Cosmos. The moment Klein heard this term, his spiritual intuition began to give crazy warnings. He remembered very clearly that the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernight, Ariana, had told him before that unless he became an angel, he shouldn't attempt to understand the cosmos. Otherwise, just having knowledge of it would bring him great danger. Without any hesitation, Klein, who had been hiding in the historical voids in a time before the first epoch, gave up maintaining the projection. He stood up from the stacked cities of old, and he took 4 steps counterclockwise. Almost at the same time, the violent lightning that streaked across the sky of the forsaken land of the gods calmed down. The endless darkness vanished as well. A gigantic crimson moon covered half the sky. The light on the surface of the crimson moon stretched out as if it was alive. Outside this world, the moon that was revolving around the earth had a crimson sea flowing. It drowned everything, as though it was digesting this huge natural satellite. The blood-colored sea boiled when Klein learned about the news of Great Old Ones, outer deities, and cosmos. They quickly gathered towards the middle, constantly piling together until they formed an indiscernible, blood-red phantom image. This phantom image was many times bigger than the moon. It had countless eyes, and it looked down at the blue planet. It cast its gaze at Klein's main body through the connection that was established the moment he learned about these matters. As the crimson sea receded, many craters appeared on the surface of the moon. From the ground, the moon no longer crimson. It was bright and clear. It had remained the same despite the hundreds of millions of years. Further out in space, the brown star, orange star, scarlet planet, gold planet, and blue planet twinkled like the blinking of eyes. In the fog of history, boils began to emerge from the surface of Klein's body. Each boil had a mutated worm of spirit. They wore the faces of Zhou Mingrue, Klein Moretti, German Sparrow, and Dwayne Dantes. They were trying their best to drill out of his body. Klein's thoughts quickly turned chaotic. His entire spirit body seemed to be torn apart by an invisible blade, but he still forced himself to finish reciting the last sentence of the incantation. The celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Silently, Klein's spirit body tore through the gray fog and entered Sapphira Castle. The power of the entire space began to boil as it surged forward and enveloped him, melting away wisps of black gas, streams of red light, and boils, severing the invisible connection. Nearly 10 seconds later, the struggling Klein finally regained consciousness. He stood up using the high-back chair as support. Inside Chernobyl, Amon, who was standing at the edge of the cliff, said to himself, in a low voice as he adjusted the crystal monocle on his right eye, quite a fast reaction. If Klein had been a second slower and was embroiled in that chaotic state, Amon could deceive the connection between the projection and the actual body before Klein could remove the maintenance of the historical projection. He could then appear inside the corresponding historical fragment. Above the gray fog, Klein sat down and rubbed his temples. That Amon was indeed lying. He should be the avatar that stayed behind to guard Chernobyl. When he discovered that I had come, he hid somewhere between the cliff and the chaos sea, pretending that he had just crawled out. He was unable to deal with my main body by bypassing the historical projection. Furthermore, he might not have the strength of a Sequence 2 angel. Therefore, he pretended to be an independent avatar so as to carry out the deceit. On the surface, he attempted to make me believe that he was an independent avatar and could be cooperated with. He made me focus on this aspect, but in fact, he concealed the danger in his words. Even in a normal conversation with the god of deceit, one can still be scammed. However, in order to achieve his goals, he had also given a sufficient amount of secrets. Chapter 12 24 Guesses about the Apocalypse Lone Kingdom, Backland. Furs, who was still sleeping soundly, suddenly woke up from her dream. She subconsciously cast her gaze out the window. She didn't lack similar experiences. Before she became a member of the Tarot Club, she often woke up in the middle of the night due to the curse of the full moon. But today, she didn't feel any familiar pain, but her heart throbbed for some unknown reason. As the curtain had blocked the window, Furs was unable to determine what time it was from the weak light. She subconsciously got out of bed, walked to the window, and drew the curtains. The sunlight that penetrated the thin fog shone into the room, dispersing the accumulated darkness. Furs stood by the window and looked up into the sky with an obvious look of confusion. The sun has already risen, and the crimson moon had long set. Why do I still feel the sensation I have during the curse of the full moon? Furthermore, there were still many days to the full moon. The Intis Republic capital, Trier. One by one, the astronomers, who had woken up early, as well as mysticism enthusiasts, as well as the covert beyonders, cast their gazes high into the sky. The layers of evening clouds disappeared, and the huge and bright moon outshone the light of the stars. The moon's color was no longer the usual crimson color. It was white and unusually bright. All who saw it were stunned. This was a moon that they had never seen before. Be it the normal textbooks of human society or books related to mysticism, none of them recorded similar phenomena. Apart from the common new moon, full moon, and the occasional blood moon, the moon had never experienced such changes. At least for the past 1,300 years since the beginning of the fifth epoch, there had been absolutely no such change. At this moment, the onlookers realized that, other than the crimson and blood-red states, the moon had another color. The forsaken land of the gods, the city of silver. As it was in the afternoon when the frequency of lightning was high, Derek and company noticed the abnormality in the sky. They were used to the familiar lightning and darkness. In just a few seconds, all of that completely disappeared without a trace. The blood-colored circular glow that blotted out half the sky was so obvious. Its massive size illuminated everything to great visibility. The people of the City of Silver who had relatively agile thoughts immediately thought of the description and the corresponding picture of the moon in the general knowledge book. They suddenly had a thought that came to them: could this be the moon? The crimson moon? We actually saw the crimson moon. Soon, the blood-red colors of the crimson moon in front of them drained inch by inch, revealing its bright and clear body. The City of Silver residents were increasingly at a loss, unsure of what had happened. Having heard Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and the other members of the Tarot Club talk about the outside world, Derek Berg was even more shocked and surprised than them. This was because there was no such natural phenomenon outside the forsaken land of the gods. A few seconds later, the moon disappeared and the darkness once again engulfed everything. The frequent flashes of lightning became the main source of light. What happened just now? Did you see that red circle? Moon. That's the moon. That's the crimson moon. Is this a sign that we are about to escape our current situation? Our second exploration of the Giant King's court will go very smoothly and we will open the door that leads to the outside world. Amidst the confusion, most of the residents of the City of Silver subconsciously treated this phenomenon as a good thing, treating it as an auspicious sign from mysticism. Only the chief, Colin Iliad, and the elders of the six-member council like Lovia had serious looks on their faces as they frowned. Above the grayish-white fog, inside the ancient palace. Having gained a general understanding of Amon's scam, Klein instinctively turned his attention back to the secret he had learned. He previously had some guesses about the corresponding content, but when it was truly revealed, he realized that it was even more terrifying and exaggerated than he had imagined. It made him even more hopeless. To be able to successfully attract the attention of the cosmos, this means that most of the secrets that Amon revealed are true. There really is another level above Sequence 0. This should be the level which the ancient sun god was at. However, his condition didn't seem too right. He ended up being stabbed in the back, perished, and divided up. According to what Amon said, using the creator to describe this level isn't accurate enough. He named it as above the sequences. There are also existences who use the term transcending sequences to describe that level, indicating that they have escaped the restrictions of the beyonder pathway. Deities refer to this level as great old ones, outer deities, cosmos. From this, one can tell that there are two matters. One is the vast universe outside this world. In the boundless cosmos, there are great old ones and outer deities, who are existences at the creator's level. For example, the one who controls the moon. From the looks of it, the brown star and orange star were the original planets. They have changed, making Emperor Roselle unable to recognize them. This is because there are great old ones or outer deities entrenched in them, watching our world. The box of the great old ones mutated after being corrupted by the cosmos. Yes, there are most likely more than one great old one or outer deity. Why are they all surrounding this planet? What are they spying on? They didn't directly invade because there's a power that temporarily keeps them out. Thanks to the 7 deities. Connecting this to the prophecy of the apocalypse in 1368, the 7 deities might not be playing a crucial role in this. They have yet to transcend the sequences. When the true barrier disappears in 1368, the great old ones and the outer deities will no longer be obstructed. Then, the apocalypse will descend upon us. Upon thinking of this, the questions that he had accumulated in his mind suddenly flashed through his mind. Why did the Evernight goddess take the risk of bringing about a battle of gods to seize the uniqueness of the death pathway? Why did the 7 deities tacitly acquiesce to having a black emperor? Why did Adam, Amon, and the other kings of angels, after being silent for so many years, step out from behind the scenes in this era? Why were the legacies of the ancient gods from the second epoch appearing one after another? Why was there only one transmigrator released from Sapphira Castle in the first 4 epochs, but 2 in the 5th epoch, a period spanning slightly more than 1,000 years? Few, be they good or bad, everyone is working hard to improve themselves to usher in the apocalypse. The goddess, who is so good at setting things into motion, chose such a risky method because she wanted to transcend the sequences and become a great old one. There's only a decade or so left. Time waits for no man. Did she provide me help in secret because she had similar hopes? Adam didn't take action even though he could finish me off twice. Apart from him and me not having any significant grudges, this plays a role in everything? Klein gently rapped the edge of the long, model table as he muttered softly, the key to becoming a great old one or outer deity is one of the 9 Sphirot. Looking around the empty Sapphira castle, Klein sighed and muttered to himself, as for the exact situation, I have to look at the second blasphemy slate to know. Unfortunately, I don't know when I'll have a chance. He then focused his attention on something else. I'm not sure if the ancient sun god had completely transcended the sequences. If a native great old one were to be born, humanity might still have a sliver of hope when the apocalypse happens. His death is even more complicated than I imagined. It's no wonder Emperor Roselle said that only a sequence 0 could preserve themselves and protect the people they value. I wonder if those great old ones or outer deities have infiltrated the earth with their powers? Yes, according to how the 7 orthodox deities and the other evil gods like the true creator view the primordial moon and the mother tree of desire with animosity, the latter might be great old ones or outer deities. It's no wonder the mother tree of desire could directly mislead my divination above the grey fog. She is the most dangerous existence in my books. I understand what those great old ones and outer deities are gathered around this world for. They likely want to obtain the 9 Sphirot. Destroying the world is just something done in passing. As he thought of this, Klein suddenly recalled the phrase the mother tree of desire had said through Cynthia, "Admiral, I want to have a child with you." He couldn't help but shudder as he seriously considered his safety after returning to the real world. He already had a certain level of understanding of the cosmos. As long as he subconsciously thought of something related, he would directly establish a connection with the great old ones and the outer deities, and be corrupted. If not for the fact that Sapphira Castle had cut off all contact from before, I wouldn't dare return to reality. After some thought, Klein decided to invite his psychiatrist, Miss Justice, to help hypnotize him and seal the corresponding information deep within his subconscious. Only when he saw a preset reminder would he recall it. He originally wanted to directly summon the projection of Justice from the historical void to do this, but considering that this was an intricate task, it was very likely a mistake or oversight might happen if the person didn't have a deep understanding of the mind. And once there was a slip-up, the great old ones and outer deities would cast their eyes on him. Phew, I need to remember to get Miss Justice to hypnotize herself to forget this matter. After some deliberation, Klein turned the corresponding request into a stream of light and threw it into the crimson star representing justice. Not long after, just after breakfast, Audrey, who had yet to leave home, arrived above the gray fog. The long bronze table had vanished. There was a desk and 2 chairs placed in the ancient palace. "Mr. World, what is the matter that you wish to forget this time?" Audrey looked at Gehrman Sparrow, who was sitting opposite her, and raised the most important question. Klein rubbed his temples and used a deep voice to describe the secrets of the cosmos, great old ones, and outer deities. Upon hearing this, Audrey's eyes widened bit by bit as if she had been possessed by an evil god. After he was done, she fell silent for a few seconds before saying with the same deep and slightly confused voice, "This is the truth of the apocalypse? Even the 7 deities are unable to save us?" Without waiting for Klein's reply, Audrey laughed self-deprecatingly. "I thought what I've been doing recently was very meaningful. I thought the worst news I could think of was the defeat of Lone and the annihilation of the Church. But compared to the secrets you told me, all of this is so insignificant." Chapter 12:25 Counseling. When he heard Miss Justice's slightly bleak and confused words, Klein could empathize with her. This was because he had previously had similar thoughts. After recalling snippets from self-help books, he deliberated and said, "A father's death is so insignificant to the entirety of Lone. 1 or more cases might happen every day, but to his child's family, it is something that can change their fate. Similarly, if we don't reach the level of an angel, everyone's outcome will be sealed, death, and be buried. But this doesn't mean that the time from when we were born to the time we die is meaningless." Audrey nodded slightly when she heard that. She once again said in a self-deprecating tone, "I understand all of this. However, the secrets you mentioned had a huge impact on me, and I couldn't control my emotions. As a psychiatrist, I actually needed someone else to counsel me." Klein smiled and said, "Isn't this very normal? Many times, we can tell if someone else's condition is normal, but we can't clearly see our own problems. Didn't you mention that you and Susie counsel each other from time to time?" Due to the fact that Dwayne Dantes had seen Susie, the golden retriever, Audrey didn't hide anything related to her during their chats. Audrey nodded gently and said, "Yes, that's right. I've already straightened my thoughts out. I should do what I can and not leave any regrets." She gradually adjusted her mental state. Klein then said, "It's not just a matter of not leaving any regrets, we might be able to add to the forces that resist against the apocalypse. Compared to the whole, this might be trivial, but even the vastest desert is made up of grains of sand. The boundless ocean is also formed by droplets of water. As long as everyone sends out as much light as the heat inside them, it might bring some hope." Sends out as much light as the heat inside them. Audrey repeated the keywords in Gehrman Sparrow's words softly. "Don't quote me," Klein added with a smile. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled up as she replied with a faint smile, could it be something Emperor Roselle said? That I don't know. I have to endure a strong sense of shame when flipping through his quotations. I hadn't finished reading it all this time. Klein didn't give an affirmative answer, nor did he deny it. Instead, he said, start hypnotizing me. Let me forget things related to the cosmos, and only remember the corresponding reminder. A little while longer. I would like your advice on something. Audrey openly made a request. She took this opportunity to recount what she had been doing recently, as well as the difficulties and perplexities she had encountered. Mr. World, what suggestions do you have? What should I do to lessen the suffering of the people of Backlund before the war ends? As for stopping the war, although she wanted to, she knew that she didn't have the ability to do so. At the same time, she also understood that even Mr. World wouldn't be able to do it. Even if Mr. Fool personally intervened, he would at most be able to turn the situation around. There was no way to stop the war. After all, this world war was essentially a battle between deities. After hesitating for a few seconds, Klein calmly said, although the spectator pathway tries to act behind the scenes as much as possible, and although I always keep the words caution and carefulness in my mind for everything I do, and try not to put myself in a dangerous situation. When he said this, Audrey subconsciously thought to herself, from the various rumors at sea, the descriptions of furs and the others, and the demigod battle I witnessed, I really can't see the caution and carefulness. There's only dominance and radicalism. To be able to do those things and survive on strength alone is indeed not enough. Seeing that Miss Justice was listening seriously with her green eyes filled with attentiveness, he continued, in this world, nothing can be easily resolved without taking risks. Sometimes, I do something with the thought that death is a possibility. The muttering in Audrey's heart stopped. She fell silent for a while before slowly saying, I understand what you mean. There are many times when you can't do what you want while ensuring absolute safety. You can only choose one of them. Klein nodded and decided to let Miss Justice understand the reality of this world better, so as to prevent her from being overly idealistic when she did things. The method you mentioned just now is the most feasible, with the least risks. The people who can help the people of Backlund are the nobles, churches, businessmen, and the royal family. Why don't we rob Fasak, Intis, and the Fainapotter army of their food? Audrey subconsciously asked. Klein calmly said, this is because the three armies have already entered the Lone Kingdom's borders. Even if you can escape a demigod's notice and successfully snatch the food, they will not collapse. They will definitely snatch the food from the surrounding people for sustenance. The effects will not be significant in the short term. As for the long term, we might not have the luxury of time to wait that long. When that happened, it was obvious to Audrey who would be the true victims. This was the difference between a war between deities and an ordinary war. Besides, I'm unable to do that. The capacity of Traveler's Bag is limited. It's the same for the teleportation recorded in Lamino's travels. Justice Audrey began to counsel herself as she asked thoughtfully, if I were to really obtain food from the nobles, businessmen, and royal family, what reaction would the church have when they discover traces of my interference? Klein maintained his previous tone and said, a tacit acquiesce. Audrey vaguely felt that this was the answer, but she couldn't figure out the reason. Klein continued, believers are the anchors of the deities. One believer is an anchor point. In this aspect, there is no difference between a noble and a poor person. In essence, no one is nobler or lowlier. Under normal circumstances, nobles and merchants can use their status, power, wealth, and influence to help the church maintain its system and spread its faith. Therefore, they are more important. But in this situation, who is more important, thousands of anchors, or millions of anchors? This is a simple problem in mathematics. Faced with the truth of the veil that had been ripped off, Audrey was momentarily speechless. Seeing this, Klein added, from this point of view, whatever you want to do on a wider level has its meaning. You will help the Evernight Goddess and the Lord of Storms stabilize their anchors. In the future, this might be critical to resisting the apocalypse. Audrey pursed her lips bit by bit, holding them pursed for a long time before relaxing them. She chuckled and said, "Only now do I realize that I'm actually a little proud of my status as a noble. Nobility is in your character, not status." Klein helped her finish her sentence. Audrey slowly exhaled and calmed her chaotic inner thoughts. She didn't make up her mind as a result. She casually said, "Our tarot club and the church." The relationship with the Church of Evernight seems pretty good. Mr. Fool and the Evernight Goddess are allies? This question stumps me. I do wish to become allies with the goddess, but she might not be interested. After lampooning a few times, Klein said in a serious tone, "You can think of them as allies at the moment." He deliberately emphasized that it was only now, so as to prevent himself from being slapped in the face by reality in the future. At the same time, he muttered the real answer in his heart. Based on the current situation, the goddess was an angel investor of the Tarot Club, the major shareholder. Audrey nodded slowly and suddenly smiled. "I was just thinking about what you could be mumbling inwardly when you answered allies at the moment. It must be interesting, just like when we were exploring Liveseed, lady, a psychiatrist isn't suited to joking with a patient on such matters. Is it because we've been chatting for too long in the past half year and have become much more familiar with each other that you've revealed your true nature? Please show some respect to this adventurer in front of you who is famous for being cold and crazy." Yes, I have to say, the spectator pathway's ability to adjust their own emotions is indeed impressive. It was all Leonard's fault that time. Klein was first taken aback before he pretended that nothing had happened as he leaned back into his chair. "Let's begin." Audrey immediately reined in her emotions and began to seriously and carefully attempt to hypnotize him. After everything was over, Klein confirmed that Miss Justice wasn't under the notice of the Great Old Ones through the Crimson Star after she returned to the real world. Of course, he had already forgotten anything regarding the Great Old Ones or outer deities. He was just able to confirm that nothing abnormal had happened from Miss Justice's condition. Phew. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He threw the piece of paper that could awaken his memories into the junk pile and told himself to wait until he became an angel. Backlund, Bridge area, in an apartment. Emlyn White looked at Merrick, who had suddenly appeared in front of him. The former took off his hat and bowed in an extremely gentlemanly manner. "What's the matter?" Merrick sat on the sofa and leaned forward, his hands clasped. Emlyn pulled a chair and sat down. He smiled and asked, "Do you still wish to deal with the important figures of the Rose School of Thought's indulgence faction? Do you have any leads?" Merrick asked indifferently. Emlyn was definitely prepared before he paid the visit, so he said unhurriedly, "I do not have any clues regarding the person in charge of the Rose School of Thought in Backlund. However, after the war escalated, the southern continents East and West Balam, Star Highlands, Paz Valley, and Hagenti Plains have been thrown into chaos. Many of the Rose School of Thought demigods have emerged and walked onto the stage. They are no longer so difficult to lock onto." Merrick looked at the red-eyed and thin-lipped Emlyn and said, "Which Duke or Marquis of the Sanguine are you representing? Am I not allowed to represent myself?" Emlyn raised his chin slightly and asked with a smile. Merrick shook his head seriously and said, "You are only a Sequence 5, you aren't qualified enough." He had said it so directly that Emlyn was momentarily at a loss for words. 1. Quote from a leading figure of modern Chinese literature, Lu Sun. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.